Good evening, and welcome to the January 10th regular meeting of the City of Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission.
State law establishes planning commissions. This planning commission is comprised of 9 residents appointed to serve our community. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. Other individuals participating in the meeting include representatives of the city's planning department, city attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman Associates.
If you wish to address the Planning Commission at the appropriate time, please come forward to the lectern when recognized and clearly print your name and address on the sign-in sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. If you have a cell phone or any other device that might disrupt the meeting, please either switch it to the silent mode or turn it off. At this time, I'll ask the Planning Commission Recording Secretary, Kathy Zarnecki, to conduct the roll call.
Mr. Buechner.
Here.
Mr. Faison.
Here.
Mr. Fox.
Here.
Mr. Hudson.
Here.
Mr. Krent.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here.
Ms. Malala Holly.
Here.
Ms. Barakis.
Here.
Mr. Tagle.
Here.
Quorum present, Mr.
Thank you. And welcome, Mr. Fox, to your first official meetings. Second on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Mr. Faison makes a motion. Is there a second? Mr. Tagle seconds it. Any discussion? One thing before I call the roll is at our last meeting, we postponed a concept plan unit development plan from Mr. Abathiri, I believe, and we did postpone it to this meeting tonight, but he's told us he does not want it on the agenda tonight because he's not able to be here. So it won't be on the agenda for this evening's meeting.
Yeah, and in fact, he's asked to postpone it indefinitely for personal reasons.
Okay, great, thank you. So that, make sure that's corrected. And with that, we'll take a roll call on approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chair, was it Commissioner Tagle?
Yes.
Yes, yep, he seconded it, yep.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Mr. Fox.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Malala Holly.
Yes.
Ms. Barakis.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Buechner.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, next on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the December 13th meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Mr. Fox makes a motion to approve. Mr. Buechner seconds it. Any corrections to the minutes or any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, we're ready for the roll call.
Mr. Fox.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Malala Holly.
Yes.
Ms. Barakis.
Abstain.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Buechner.
Yes.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is public comment for items not on the agenda. Is there anyone here that would like to address the Planning Commission on items that are not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, then we are ready to go on to the first order of business, which is a public hearing for a zoning ordinance text amendment, file number ZOTA 257, Places of Worship. And I'm not sure which one of the, who on staff is going to be presenting this, so.
Surprise, it's me.
Mr. Crane, your lucky night.
What do I always say, Mr. Chairman? If the attorney has to talk, you know it's not necessarily going to be a good
We're
meeting.
in trouble, huh?
So I will keep this brief. I think Mr. Carlisle's memo did a very good job of outlining the issues. For those of you who don't know, this zoning text amendment is brought to you courtesy of litigation involving the city that stemmed from a zoning board of appeals decision. I don't know if anyone's looked at the City of Troy's ordinance recently, but the city was required by the federal district court judge to put a notice on section 4.21 and section 6.221 stating that certain provisions are not enforceable as written. So these zoning text amendments here are brought to you as a way to help fix what the federal district court thought was wrong with the city's zoning ordinance. The first one is pretty easy. It has to do with the schedule of uses, section 4.21. In essence, what the court has told the city is that we can no longer treat places of worship as requiring a special use in the Community Facilities District. So that's a simple change to Section 4.21, where we are simply changing the S designation to a P, a permitted designation. Similarly, Section 6.21 of the zoning ordinance applies specifically to places of worship. And what the court has said is that sections, letters E and F of that section, Article 6.21, is unenforceable. So we're recommending language, when you eliminate something, you're going to create a collateral consequence somewhere else. So with respect to eliminating the 50-foot setbacks for front, side, and rear yards with respect to places of worship, we're not saying there won't be any setback requirements. Those will just be based on where the zoning is that the place of worship would go. There won't be a special setback requirement for places of worship. The issue comes when there's a place of worship that wants to be in a residential district. So that's where the special language that applies to a residential district comes in. It gives this body some discretion with respect to allowing parking in the rear, in the side yards or the rear yards, or on the street. So I don't know if anyone has any specific questions. Like I said, I think Ben's memo did a great job of laying out the issues.
Any questions? Yes, Ms. Parakis.
Yeah, I have some questions. As a starting point, I'm having trouble understanding what the Community Facilities District really means. I have the definition in front of me, but, you know, on that chart in the zoning ordinance, there's R1B, there's, you know, all these different districts, but this encapsulates residential areas, so it seems like there's some overlap. And I'm trying to figure out the circumstances that would allow a place of worship in a neighborhood. I mean, is a place of worship allowed in a neighborhood?
It's allowed by special use in a neighborhood.
So if we change it to permitted, then
We're not talking about residential uses, we're talking specifically about just the community facilities, right? We're not touching the designation with respect to residential uses in R1A through R1E. We're just talking about CF. And I'll defer to, you know, Mr. Savanah with respect to what CF is specifically, but we're not touching the use designation for the residential designations R1A through R1E.
okay, yeah, then I need an understanding of the overlap that I see.
When you say overlap, what can you explain that again, please?
Okay, so the definition says, the unique nature and requirements of the uses contained within this district, meaning the Community Facilities District, and their need for a location within the residential portion of the community warrant the establishment of a separate zoning classification, which contains land use controls that will ensure that such uses will be compatible with the adjacent land uses and not contrary to the spirit and purpose of this ordinance.
That's helpful, thank you. Just give me a second.
Yeah, oh yeah, I can give you the provision. It's 4.11A.
I believe when it mentions the residential portion of the community, I think what it's referring to is the, if you look at it, if I pulled up the zoning map, you'd see a preponderance of yellow on the zoning ordinance. A lot of it's north of Big Beaver, just to roughly describe it. And there's some in the southeast corner. I think it's intended to provide community facilities to those areas that are predominantly residentially zoned or residential in character.
But it's a specific zoning designation, CF.
Okay, so really there's two separate issues. The one is making it permitted there, and then a separate issue is the residential, this site shall have frontage on and primary access to a major or minor arterial, and then in residential districts, this requirement can be waived. So we're implying in this language that residential districts are not on major or minor arterials, they're residential neighborhoods, is that correct?
So the proposed language would allow for a waiver of the Planning Commission as part of special use approval subject to standards. So the Planning Commission, if there was an application for a place of worship that was not on a major or minor arterial, the Planning Commission would apply the overall special use standards as well as these particular standards to that application.
It's an attempt to protect the neighborhoods.
I understand that. But what I guess the question is, because I don't know anything about places of worship, is how it works. Do they have to go, are they regulated by the state in any way? So I guess the example I'll give is, in a neighborhood, you can have a family daycare, for example, and that's regulated by the state. And they get annual visits from the state, and they are restricted to 12 kids in the house, and there has to be a ratio of adults to kids, things like that. So I guess what I'm worried about for residents is if someone builds a house in a neighborhood and then starts holding religious, religious services or whatever you call them, because we're saying that it can look different and be different. What if 50 people come, and are we not going to know about it until neighbors have to complain that they're parking all over the place and the streets can't handle it and things like that? So do they first have to come and before this happens? Because I imagine it's not going to be a church in a neighborhood. It could look like a house in a neighborhood, but they're holding church type or worship type activities in that house, which it seems like we're permitting. So I'm not exactly sure I feel comfortable. I feel like it's too loose.
Well, that type of situation could happen today without doing anything with this language. So I think that there was a question there in terms of what could we do or what would we do, or was that rhetorical?
Well, I mean, so we're saying parking is permitted in front, side, and rear yards of a residential home. So, to me, I'm picturing a house with basically a parking lot surrounded it in a neighborhood. Is that really is that what we need to allow?
Well, I guess to speak to your example, so there's a definition for a place of worship in the zoning ordinance. And the definition, I'll read it because it's one sentence.
Yep.
A site used for or intended for the regular assembly of persons or the conducting of religious services and accessory uses herewith. So if we suddenly had a situation where there's a single family home and there's 50 cars, it wouldn't, I think it would be relatively easy to determine that that's, if it's happening every Wednesday at 6 o'clock at night, we could figure out pretty quickly that's really a place of worship, and they would need special use approval. They'd be in violation of the zoning ordinance, so we would pursue that. So the requirement would be that if that was what the intent was, that they would have to submit a complete application for special use approval to the Planning Commission for consideration. That would include an engineered site plan, landscape plan, preliminary drainage, stormwater detention, parking, dumpsters, et cetera, as part of the plan, which is a significant expense. And if they still wanted to do that, there's special use standards that speak, as I think you're all well aware of the special use standards. They speak to things like consistency with the master plan and compatibility and impact on the neighbors. There's also site plan standards, and then there's these specific standards. So it would be a challenge, potentially a challenging application. I understand your concerns.
Okay, it's just that it's specifically talking about in residential districts, allowing the parking the way it is, and then traffic from events, including church worship services and other large assemblies, shall be controlled so as not to create congestion or unreasonable delays on the public street.
Right, so what the court has said is that provision letter F is unenforceable. So if you eliminate provision F, there's going to be a consequence of what you're talking about in the neighborhoods. So what we're proposing is language that limits the collateral consequence related to the elimination of F specific to places of worship in residential neighborhoods.
So just to add to the conversation, if you go on our city website, the courts, you can see this in red here on this section 4.21. As part of the settlement, we were required to put this red stamp on our zoning ordinance, and I'll read it. On 3/18/2022, a federal court ruled that places of worship are permitted as of right in the CF district. So the federal court's basically already said that that letter is no longer an S, it's a P.
Okay.
So, and they also basically required us to make other amendments as part of the judgment.
So we could, so same thing goes for 6.21. The court has said letters E and letter F are unenforceable as written. So we could simply just eliminate those. But if we eliminate them for places of worship, when we talk about a special use in a residential area, we need some provision, some protection for the residents. And that's what this language is attempting to do. I understand your concern, and if you have some additional language, I mean, you're a recommending body, if you have some additional language that you want to propose, we can certainly discuss it and take it back to Ms. Bloom, take it back to Mr. Motzni, and obviously before we take it to City Council.
I think that's a really good point. So if you ignore E and F, it looks like we're being maybe more inclusive or we're providing less protection to single-family residential. But when you remember that we're proposing to delete E and F, we're actually providing more protection for single-family residential by adding those provisions. It's a little confusing.
I mean, thank you, I appreciate it. I think I understand it better. Personally, I'm not prepared to recommend it today. I would like some more time with it, but that's, just me. I'd like to look at it more now that I have a better understanding of what you've told me, and I'd like to think about it a little more.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Fox.
Hello. So, forgive me if I'm asking new guy questions.
Could you raise your microphone?
Hello? Forgive me if I'm asking questions that make me sound kind of new. So my understanding of this is that this is all the result of a lawsuit, federal law, RLUIPA, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a risk that these parking requirements could potentially lead to a future lawsuit along the same lines, saying, hey, you're putting undue burden, et cetera, on my... Or are we mirroring other parts of the ordinance, thus the whole unequal application of the ordinance is kind of dealt with that? Sorry if that was confusing, I just...
No, I think I understand your question. There's no guarantee that, again, like I said before, if we change something, we're trying to comply with what the court says. So there's no guarantee that something else comes up, bubbles up to the surface, and a different court, a different judge, says, oh, no, you didn't do a good job amending your ordinance. I mean, Mr. Carlisle and his team have looked at this. Ms. Bloom has looked at this. Mr. Motzi and I have looked at this. I mean, we think this is going to pass constitutional muster. But obviously, there are no guarantees. I mean, the goal here is to treat non-religious places of assembly the same as places of worship are treated. There's supposed to be an even playing field, and that's what RLUIPA requires.
Okay. So then, I guess if we're stating opinions on how we would want to, I would be comfortable voting this then, because it seems as if it's mainly a response to a lawsuit. I don't know how much option the city really has in terms of a lot of stuff. Because it's coming down from a court order from a federal judge?
Well, let me be clear, and I want to make sure that I make this point. The court is not ordering this particular language.
Okay.
The court has ordered certain aspects of the ordinance are unenforceable. So this is not language that's being imposed on the city by the court. I want to make sure that's clear. This is language that the Carla Wortman team came up that Lori and Mr. Matsny reviewed before bringing to you, before we take it to city council.
Okay, I'm still comfortable with this language then, I would say.
Any other questions? I just had a couple. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Tagle, I'll let you go first.
In paragraph B, under 6.21, it starts to identify associated uses. And the last of the associated uses says, "and others." Who interprets "and others"? Because I know there are other uses that churches have within their buildings during the course of the week. It could be a daycare, it could be an incubator office situation. So there are other things, and I don't know that we could cover all of them, but I guess I'm just curious, is there another word other than "other" that we might be able to maybe put a little bit more of clarity there?
So that language is there today. So who makes that determination? The zoning administrator upon an application by a place of worship. It's really intended to cover those uses that are, synonymous with a place of worship. And you're right. I mean, it could be a lot of different things.
Yeah.
It could be a bake sale. It could be, there's a lot of different Christmas tree sales.
And I think we're seeing in that market, if you will, changes. Looking for other opportunities to open their doors other than Sunday morning or Saturday evenings. So, again, I just raise that as, I guess I'm comfortable if we as the city have that ability to start to look at that and put some rationale behind, does that fit, if you will? Okay, thanks.
I guess the two questions I had was, Ms. Dufresne, so items E and F have been struck down by the federal court, so those no longer exist? And so
Well, they're unenforceable, right.
unenforceable. So the language that's in red that's been added is more or less protecting residential areas. Now the E and F no longer are enforceable. Is that correct?
That's the goal. yes.
Okay. And the goal, and the other thing that came out of this court case was the federal courts were saying that our language was in effect discriminating against religious institutions compared to other institutions that might have the same impact on a residential neighborhood. Is that kind of the gist of it?
At its core, yes. The court said that the city's ordinance was not treating places of worship the same as it was, the ordinance was not treating places of worship the same as it was treating other places of assembly that were not religious-based.
Okay.
And the key is places of assembly.
Okay.
I think your point was well stated. So it's, if we strike the requirement that front, side, and rear yard setbacks shall be a minimum of 50 feet, if we strike that, we're potentially opening up single-family residential neighborhoods to impact. We don't want to do that. We want to put the provisions that are in red to provide more protection for single-family residential neighborhoods.
Okay. Let me get Mr. Krent first, and I'll come back to you.
Yeah, this is this has nothing to do with the new changes. This is just the existing part of section 6.21, places of worship. Part B says specific use standards for a place of worship require that the facilities incidental to the main religious sanctuary must be used for church, worship, or religious education purposes in a manner consistent with residential zoning and compatible with adjacent residential property. So we've got a situation, let's say a church has the residence for the priest on that site. So if it's incidental to the sanctuary, it's let's say a small house, it must be used for church. It's not used for church, it's used for his home. Worship, it's not used for worship. It's not used for religious education purposes. So does that old language leave out the resident for the priest? I mean, we've got a lot of those situations right now where we've got a church, which is the main building, and then we've got incidental facilities that aren't part of the worship. It's a residence.
So that,
Hey, I don't want to open up a can of worms, I'm just saying it just kind of stood out to me.
okay. So you notice in the text amendment, some of that's proposed to be struck from the,
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, good. Thank you. Never mind.
Ms. Parakis.
Right. What I was seeing is the two provisions, E and F, that are unenforceable, to me are, I think the reason that they were saying that they're unenforceable is because it's basically like saying if you're near a residential area, they're trying to protect residential areas that are near a place of worship, but the previous language also said that the site shall have frontage on and primary access to a major or minor arterial. So, the examples that come to mind are on a main road, like a Livernois or a Crooks or a Rochester Road, and it fronts, and it abuts a residential area, so they were trying to protect it, and they were saying, well, how come there's restrictions for places of worship, but not for a restaurant or an office building or whatever? But the new language, to me, somehow says, go ahead and bring the places of worship into a residential neighborhood that is zoned R1B. That's what it seems to permit. Because we say in residential districts, which to me is an R1B neighborhood, you can waive the requirement and then allow parking, and as long as the traffic doesn't bother, create congestion, unreasonable delays, and then that's going on in a neighborhood. That's how I'm reading it.
The neighborhoods will still require places of worship to be special uses, so you still have to meet the special use standards. Before you get to the places of worship standards, you have to get through the special uses standards.
Because if they try to go through a residential district on the chart, it will be under R1.
Correct. R1A through R1E.
Okay.
Any other questions from the commission? Yes, Mr. Savage.
just to piggyback on that, so when special use is triggered, parking requirements are triggered. So this is a place of assembly use, parking, so now they've got to develop a paved parking lot with stormwater detention. You know the drill. You see site plans twice a month. So it triggers a significant investment on behalf of the applicant.
Any other questions? All right, we do have the public hearing on this. Open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the commission on this proposed language? Seeing no one approaching the dais, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for either more questions or a resolution of some type. Anyone like to make a motion? Mr. Faison.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Mr. Faison, I apologize for interrupting, but there is an error in the proposed resolution. So whatever your resolution says, it's not Article 5, it's as written, it's Article 4 and Article 6.
So not Article 5, Article
Correct.
4, and Article 6.
Yes, thank you.
Resolved that the Planning Commission hereby recommends to the City Council that Article 4 and 6 of Chapter 39 of the Code of the City of Troy, which includes provisions related to places of worship, be amended as printed on the proposed zoning ordinance text amendment.
Is there a second to the motion? Mr. Tagle seconds it. Any further discussion? I'm glad the city did come forth with language that both eliminates some of the discriminatory language that we had in our ordinance and at the same time protects the residential areas that might be impacted. So with that, I guess we're ready for the roll call.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Malala-Holly.
Yes?
Ms. Parakis.
No.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes?
Mr. Biegner.
Yes.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Mr. Fox.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, and it goes on to City Council next. All right. Next on the agenda, this will be Mr. Carlisle's show coming up here. Special use approval and preliminary site plan review for file number SU JPLN 2022-0004, proposed 2690 Crooks Road Apartments, east side of Crooks, south of Big Beaver at 2690 Crooks, Section 28, currently zoned BB Big Beaver District. Oh, got to get your pointer. So.
Thank you. For a little background, tonight is an application for you to repurpose an existing building, an existing site located at 2690 Crooks. It's located on the east side of Crooks, just south of Big Beaver. You'll note it's referred to as the Lindsay Center site. It's a existing site with a 4-story building on the site, which the applicant is proposing to repurpose that for residential uses, and then in addition construct a new 5-story residential building on the same site. So for background, the Lindsay Center existing building would be converted to 62 units, and then there would be a new 5-story 94-unit multifamily building located to the rear or the back of that existing building. We do note, based on a zoning text amendment the Planning Commission recommended with City Council, residential uses are permitted on the first floor. However, they can't front the public right-of-way, and they're on the rear of the site or the side of the site, and they require a special use permit. So they are seeking a special use permit to allow for residential uses on the first floor of those buildings. The site plan, in terms of the buildings themselves, they meet all the Big Beaver form-based bulk standards. We do note that access will remain off one point of Crooks on the southern end of the site, as well as a cross-access to the site at the site we'll talk about next, actually, on Big Beaver. Access in circulation has been reviewed by the City Fire Marshal, who do note that they are requiring a 26-foot wide fire access lane around the building. I believe right now they're 24 feet, so they'll need to increase that by 2 additional feet. Shared parking is obviously a major point of discussion for this site as well as the next site. OHM has reviewed the shared parking study provided by the applicant, and they do share the following information for the Planning Commission consideration. First, parking for 999 Big Beaver alone, which we'll talk about next, is sufficient. However, parking for 2960 Crooks that we're talking about does require the use of shared parking with 999. If in conjunction, there would be a deficit on the site. I don't want to go into too much detail about that myself. I'll let the experts handle that. Stefan Max from OHM, as well as Julie Kroll, who is the traffic expert from the applicant, are both here tonight to address any specific shared parking questions. In addition, both those members will also be able to speak to a traffic study. They did submit a traffic study. It was reviewed by both the city and OHM, as well as the Oakland Road Commission. There was a review in your packet, and it did include a number of proposed road improvements as a result of the proposed development as well. Landscaping, we do note the landscaping does comply, except we do note that there are required 28 parking lot trees. Only 3 of those 28 are actually in the parking lot themselves. The other 25 are along the perimeter of the parking lot. The Planning Commission has granted waivers to locate parking lot trees outside of the actual parking lot, so they still have to comply with the total number. However, the location is a waiver the Planning Commission has granted, and again, this should be a point of discussion with the Planning Commission. With regards to the architecture itself, this shows the existing Lindsay building and what the improvements will be. They do propose to keep the existing metal panels and glass to remain. However, they do propose a new metal wrap and balconies will be added to the exterior skin. The exterior metal and glass will be removed for new outdoor balcony doors and windows. Most of the other elements of the building will remain, and the proposed color scheme that they're showing is going to be a mixture of dark and light grays with some orange accents around the balconies. The new building, I can't tell if it's an issue with the printer or the color scheme. I can't tell if they're going to match. I think there's some consistencies with the color, but I'd like the applicant to kind of answer that question. The first 3 floors are going to be a utility brick of different gray colors, and the 4th and 5th are going to be a hardy sidey panel. The color scheme, again, will be those dark and light grays with orange accents. And we do note that the east, south, and north elevations do not appear to meet the required 30% transparency requirement, and that should be something that the applicant should address, perhaps in a future submittal. This is a rendering of the new building. When the Planning Commission reviews this, there are actually three sets of standards to review. The first is the form-based district requirements. Talks about building orientation, entrance, ground story activation, transitional features, site access, parking and loading. Those should be points of discussion of the Planning Commission. Site plan review standards also apply. Ensure compatibility with existing commercial districts and provide transition with land uses. The development shall incorporate best architectural practices as well as enhance the character, environment, and safety for pedestrians and motorists. As I noted, in addition, this does require special use because the first floor is proposed for residential use, and as such, there are standards the Planning Commission considers: compatibility with adjacent uses, compatibility with the master plan, traffic impacts, impact on public services, compliance with zoning ordinance standards, impact on the environment, and the specific use provisions. You'll note I have a pretty long list of conditions if the Planning Commission should grant approval of that. But to get to that point, we think there should be discussion for the Planning Commission and the applicant on compliance with the different standards, Big Beaver, site plan, and special use. Discussion on architecture and material use, specifically transparency of the east, north, and south elevation on the new buildings, and consideration of a 3D model to show this building in context. Parking lot location, as well as shared parking discussion. I believe that's it. So, Mr. Chairman, open to any questions from the Planning Commission.
Any questions for Mr. Carlisle? Go ahead, Mr. Faison.
Hey, Ben, can you show the slide where you showed the location of the shared parking?
Yeah, context? Can I use some context for this? That'd be helpful.
Please.
Yeah, thank you.
Because it looks different than what I remembered from the last discussion.
So, the site, you can see my green dot here. The site that we're talking about now is 2690 Crooks.
Mm-hmm.
The site north is 911 and 911 Big Beaver. Again, this is the Kelly Services site.
Mm-hmm.
These sites are owned by the same owner. We're discussing this now. In perhaps a couple minutes, we'll discuss
Right,
this
that's
site
next
as well.
on the agenda, right?
The applicant, and I'll go into more detail on the next site, is improving this site by removing this existing building, adding some additional building, as well as a parking deck. The parking deck is going to be used for shared parking for both sites, as well as some at-grade parking for both sites. So this entire area in red is the total area under which shared parking will be accommodated for all the buildings on these two sites.
Thank you. I thought the white box was shared parking.
No, I apologize.
When that came into play.
That would be a very small area of shared parking. So yes, no, I apologize. That's supposed to be that's a key, I guess,
That's a
to the.
different site too, right?
It's a different site, yes. So I apologize. So yeah, it's the area outlined in red, is the area of shared parking.
Any other, Mr. Fox?
So I noticed on the slide there, it says 999 Big Beaver alone is sufficient, and then 2690 would require the use of the shared parking. In terms of when you're calculating that number in terms of sufficiency, is it the two numbers mashed together and then done by the two buildings? Or I guess I'm curious, does taking parking away from 999 make 999 not sufficient, or is there a different equation when it's shared?
That's part of the discussion tonight, and I'm going to leave it up to the parking engineers who actually did the parking study analysis to give you that detailed answer, but that's certainly part of the discussion tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Tagle?
I looked at the information that was presented in our packet, and there was a lot of information of buildings north of this property. What was that information provided for? Is it, that's not part of the application, is it?
It's not part of the application, but they are intermixed for three reasons. One, the same owner. Two, cross-access. Well, four reasons. Three, traffic impacts between both developments. And most importantly, the issue of shared parking and how it's allocated between the two sites.
I found it very confusing to pick that apart as I was going through that and trying to disseminate what are we really talking about here in this application and how that may or may not impact. Because what we're looking at tonight is the Crooks Road property. And there's nothing to say that what they do north of that is going to stay the same, depending on what we vote tonight. Is that correct? I mean,
well, Mr. Tagle, tonight on the same agenda, the second item on the agenda is actually the consideration of the redevelopment of the site to the north as well. We're considering both those items tonight.
So how,
You're seeing the struggle that we had reviewing this. So we, in initial conversations with the applicant, we'll be forthright. At one point, we were considering these both together.
Right.
At one point, they were separated. The applicant asked us to separate them and consider them separately. Remember, we were bringing 2690 Crooks to you at the last meeting.
Right.
Timing worked out where we brought these back together. And the reason is because if we approve 2690 Crooks with shared parking for the 911, 999 Big Beaver, we knew that they were going to eventually redevelop that, and there would have to be shared parking in some respect to make both sites work. And so that's why we brought them together tonight for
well, they're
consideration.
together, but they're two separate items, and I guess that's what I'm a little bit stumbling over. If they're together, why aren't we looking at them together as far as approval or not approval? Because if we take action on the first item, it's going to influence
Correct.
what we do on the second item.
And actually, that's the conversation I had with the chairman before the meeting, is should we talk about the second item before we have debate about the first item, so that we can consider these concurrently? Understand you really, I guess you could, it would be very difficult to approve one without the other.
Right.
With the shared parking in consideration, even though they would have to be two separate motions because they're two separate applications.
Right. Well, maybe the applicant can explain to us why it was important to bring this as two separate items and not as a single package.
They're here tonight to answer that question.
Yep, thank you.
I had the same issue, Jerry.
Yes, Ms. Malala Holly.
I'd just like to second what Mr. Tagle said. I too had the same confusion in my head when it is a shared parking space that we are talking about. Then why not consider this as one single unit and talk about it instead of separating it into two applications? So I did struggle with that, with this whole idea to understand both of them.
Mr. Chairman, then, would this be the appropriate time to ask the petitioner if it would be appropriate to present the second application to kind of have the effect of pulling them together so we can talk about the property as a whole?
Yeah, we could do that. The petitioner could come up and let us know if he'd be willing to do that.
Given the fact that they're tied in four different ways, as explained by Mr. Carlisle.
Yes, well, first, good evening. Thank you very much for having us tonight. My name is Jordan Jonah. I represent my family development company, AF Jonah Development and Management. This is, I believe, our fourth or fifth project in the city of Troy, and we're excited to be here. We do have a pretty good team behind us. I have an architect, construction engineer, civil engineer, and traffic consultant to answer any of the depth questions that I could not answer. I can dive in with a little bit, and I don't mind showing the whole Kelly site too. There are different ownership structures and so forth that prohibits us from clumping it all into one as an approval. But know that the parking study and how we looked at this was with both sites developed, and if the site to the north did not get developed for some reason, there's still a shared parking agreement with more than enough parking that satisfies the development. So either which way, there's still parking that's available for the 2690 Lindsay site. So regardless of if the site gets developed or not in the next one, there's still adequate parking in our minds that can support 2690. It's more of a internal legal issue on our side that we cannot join these properties and look to them as one. I'm happy to look at the overall development or answer any questions that could come up. And
So even though we would have to vote on them separately, if it's okay with you, we could have Mr. Carlisle do the presentation for both projects, especially related to the parking and traffic. And if that's no problem with you, then we'll have him continue on, if that's okay with Mr. Carlisle and Mr. Savinet and Ms. Dufresne. So.
not a problem. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right.
Okay. It really is the Ben Carlisle show tonight.
Well, and honestly, I thought 2690 was easier to explain, so I'll try to make this hopefully less complicated. All right, so leading into the next site is 911 and 999 Big Beaver. It's commonly referred to as a Kelly Services site. It's located at the hard corner of Big Beaver and Crooks on the southeast corner. The plan is to convert the existing Kelly Services building into Kelly Services site into a mixed-use development. It's currently zoned BB, Big Beaver. So background, if you can see my yellow pointer up here, they propose to demolish an existing building here. They propose, it's about a 5-story building. They propose to demolish this building and keep the 15-story existing Kelly Services building as an office building as it's currently used. In addition to that, they propose to add 2 new buildings at front here on Big Beaver outlined in red. This small building A is approximately 8,000 square feet. It does include a financial institution drive-through, which is a special use. It's located in the rear of that building. And then a second building B, which is a 14,000 square foot commercial retail building. In addition to those 2 buildings, they're going to add a new 4-story, located here in blue, parking garage. And on the front of that parking garage, they're going to add a 4,200 square foot office/community center building. Into the rear of it, they're going to add a 3,200 plus or minus square foot clubhouse that will serve the residential uses on site. And then the last major improvement is a 5-story, 156 unit multiple family building. The 2,600 site that we just talked about is right here. So the shared parking would be between these 2 sites, with this parking deck servicing both sites, as well as obviously the Kelly Service building and the new multifamily development. Access to the new site, or to 911 Big Beaver, will be provided 2 off of Big Beaver, 1 here, and 2 off of Crooks, 1 here, as well as a cross access to the Lindsay Center site that we just discussed. Again, the applicant's proposing shared parking, and the 5-story deck would be located kind of behind the large 17 or 15-story Kelly Services building. Again, same slide, shared parking between 2 sites. Again, the applicants and the city's engineers here to discuss those provisions. Traffic, OHM has reviewed the traffic study and does not object to the conclusions. They do note a few minor items that will not likely impact the study. They do recommend conditional approval of site plan with some items that were noted in the report. A couple items for consideration with regards to building placement. Again, this is in the Big Beaver District, which requires the buildings to be placed 10 feet from the right-of-way. They're actually asking for 2 different building placement waivers. The first waiver is building A. This is the building with the financial drive-through. You required 10 feet. They want a request of 10 feet, 10.8 feet, so a very minor deviation request from that setback. The second one is building C. This is the building that's located on Crooks. This is Crooks Road. This is the parking deck. This is the new office community center building. They're asking a deviation to go to 30 feet from the required 10 feet from the Crooks Road. Planning Commission can grant a waiver up to 30 feet, so this is within the realm of what the Planning Commission can grant in terms of a waiver. The other deviation, which I really probably shouldn't have labeled as a deviation, it's actually an ordinance requirement they need to meet. Building E, which is the multifamily building, because it's multiple story, they are allowed to have a row of parking in between Crooks Road and the building, but the row of parking can't be adjacent to the main right-of-way. It actually has to be adjacent to the building. So they actually have to flip the parking to front on the building, not front on the road. So it's actually not a waiver. I mislabeled that. It's actually, it's a requirement of the ordinance to actually flip the parking. We do note they are actually adding a drive-through as part of a financial institution. A financial institution drive-through is permitted in the Big Beaver, subject to special use conditions, as well as there is some drive-through standards that have to be met. We do find they have met those standards. However, they did not show stacking and dimensional provisions for that drive-through area, so we need to confirm that those requirements are met. Similar to 690 Crooks, the applicant is seeking a special use approval for first floor residential. We do note, however, that they are showing first floor residential along this frontage that fronts on Crooks, which is not allowed. The residential units that front on this part, and this part are permitted, but the one elevation that fronts on Crooks, you cannot have residential. So they have to alter that first floor for other uses. However, they are seeking a special use approval for the areas that remain a first floor that don't front on Crooks. Landscaping, they have met the ordinance requirements. We do note, though, they are providing twice as many landscape parking lot trees as required. However, we note that most of them are, again, on the perimeter of the parking lot, and there are long stretches of the parking that have no landscaping. So Planning Commission may allow an alternative location as discussed earlier, but again, it should be a part of the discussion of the Planning Commission. And we do note that they actually are deficient very slightly in greenbelt trees. I think they're one tree deficient. In total landscape area, I think they're 1% deficient in what they're required to be for landscape total area. They have, obviously, they have a number of new buildings, so they have a number of different architectural patterns they're showing on the site. These are the building A and B are very similar. Those are the two buildings that front, again, on Big Beaver, the two smaller buildings. They've got kind of a brown and tan color scheme with, again, glass, brick, and a limestone veneer. Parking structure, it doesn't show up very well in the actual elevation in the plan, but it shows up a lot better in the actual rendering they provided. It's a brick and masonry block with a kind of a color scheme of gray and black, and they have a brown tower, which is the tower here for the stairs and elevator. It's going to be a kind of a brown brick to match those buildings A and B. Similar architecture pattern. This is building C. This is that building that's connected to the parking deck that fronts on Crooks. Brown tan color scheme again, and with glass and brick material. Building D is a much different material selection than the other buildings. It's the clubhouse building, the kind of the back of the site, farthest away from Crooks. It's a burnished block and glass material use with a gray color scheme, and they've got you can see they've got actually a rooftop sitting area as part of the second story to the building. This is the large five-story multifamily building. It's a mix of brick, masonry block, metal panels, various colors of gray and tans throughout the building itself. It seems to be used to tie the different colors of buildings on site, to kind of tie them all together in this one building. This is a site rendering of all the sites. This is Crooks. Big Beaver, this is again the hard core. This is the existing Kelly Services building. This is building A and building B. This is where the drive-through financial institution is going to go. This is the 5-story parking deck. The small community center building, the 5-story residential building, and somewhere back in here is the office building. I'm sorry, is the clubhouse building, and this is the Lindsay Center existing building. Different view, Big Beaver, Crooks, the two buildings. There you can now see the proposed clubhouse, 5-story residential. They show the Lindsay Center, but they don't show the new building on the Lindsay Center site behind here. So again, we couldn't compare between the two without that context. This is a closer view at street level. This is Big Beaver. These are the two new A and B buildings with the Kelly Service building behind and the residential building behind. This is a view from Crooks at the park. This is a parking deck. This is the parking tower with a brick, with a staircase and elevator. And again, that small clubhouse office building. So again, similar to, Mr. Chairman, to the last review, there are standards to review, the same standards that would apply, design standards for the form-based district, site plan standards in Article 8, and again, the special use standards that apply for the drive-through, and special use standards that apply for residential uses on the first floor. I have, similar to the last application, I have a laundry list of, if the Planning Commission approves this, we do know a number of conditions, but as part of the discussion, we believe there should be discussion on the two building waivers, the review standards in the ordinance, architectural material use, parking lot location, as well as shared parking. And I'll add traffic as part of the discussion as well to this list. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Any questions for Mr. Carlisle? Yes, Ms. Malala Hawley.
Mr. Carlisle, I don't know whether you have this at the top of your head, but can you tell me what the height of the Kelly?
You know what? I knew you were going to ask that. I actually wrote down every height on the site. So thank you. I was prepared. Let me go back. I'll just go back to the site plan, if that's okay. So Building A and Building B are going to be 26 feet and 27 feet to the top of the roof line. There's a mechanical screen above it, but the building itself, 26 and 27 feet. The existing building is 15-story Kelly Service building. The parking deck is 52 feet to the top of the final parking roof, but there's a tower above that goes up to 64, 65 feet. The building C in front of it here is about 22 feet. The building D, which is the recreation building in the back, is 22 feet. And the residential 5-story building is about 62 feet, 61, 62 feet in height.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Yes, Mr. Biegner.
Green space, paths, I think I see a tennis court there. Do I see a basketball court there? I'm just curious.
Yeah, they've got some, in the recreation, they got some, obviously some outdoor recreational use. Looks like it's the basketball court, tennis court. I'm not sure these have actually finalized in terms of what these particular uses may be. But in addition, interior, they've got this existing outdoor kind of area with walking paths and some benches and some interior kind of courtyard feeling to it as well. There are sidewalks that connect the sites internally, but in terms of open space, it's really this large area in the center around the Kelly Services, as well as these kind of outdoor recreation areas along the residential. There's also a little small kind of courtyard area interior to the multifamily building as well.
They have enough green space?
They're deficient by 1%, so they're required 15%, and they have, I believe, 14%. I think they're 5,000 square feet deficient, I think the number is.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Mr. Carlisle? Just one question I have, which maybe the traffic and parking experts will have to answer it, but in one of the memos I saw, there were concerns raised about how the shared parking would work if construction is going on one site and not the other, and how that would work together, and that I assume we'll have to ask the applicant something about that, but can you kind of address that?
It's not unusual. We've done, the city has managed the situations like this before, and the best example is the Zen Apartments development, the one old Volkswagen site, where the engineering department, the building department, and the applicant worked very closely together to ensure that each phase was able to park itself. And so we coordinated improvements, building improvements were coordinated with parking improvements as well. And so we ensured that there was no single phase that couldn't park itself as it was doing. It's a coordinated effort on behalf of the applicant and the city to ensure that it parks at every phase. So it's really just it's a phasing and a management issue that would have to be worked. It would be worked out as part of some agreement that moves forward.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess.
Go ahead, Ms. Parekas.
In terms of the parking, when we talk about the spaces that are needed, and there's 91 spots that are deficient on the Lindsay Center property, or the southern property, a lot of times you'll provide a picture and show us so we can actually sit and count all the parking spots so we know that we have enough, and I didn't see that done. So I'm not really sure. I feel like we're sort of muddling up two different issues. One would be whether, how many spaces do we need, and are we saying that they need them, or are we waiving the requirement for the 312 spots? And then the second issue would be, if we're not waiving it and they need the parking spots, does the shared parking agreement provide these required spots? And that didn't seem to get answered.
Yeah, and I honestly had the same question, and that's one of the questions we had asked OHM to consider and give us kind of, in their professional opinion, could shared parking work, and if it does work, how would it work, and if they're going to be deficient and a certain number, would the planning commission feel comfortable with granting, as part of the site plan process, because of shared parking and overlapping of use, et cetera, planning commission can grant waivers from that requirement. And what, if there was a number, what that number is, and does this planning commission feel comfortable? So I don't have that number for you tonight, and that's something that we're trying to get answers for as well. But there's, the issue is, one is, would you feel comfortable with shared parking? And two, if the shared parking covers all the parking requirements, then that's one issue. The second one is if they're deficient in parking and they need relief, what's the relief, and is there science to back it up that relief would still park the site and you would feel comfortable approving it?
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? Seeing none, I guess we'll bring up the applicant again, and you can probably make your presentation for both properties and answer any questions.
Yes.
And make sure you fill in and put your name there too. So you already introduced yourself, so.
Jordan, is there a certain slide you'd like, or?
Depends on where you would like me to start. But,
It's up to you.
why don't we start with the retail, if that's okay, and work our way backwards? So what we did here is when we purchased this site right before COVID, actually right when the state actually shut down almost 3 years ago. And when we worked with Kelly Services very closely, they've been a long-term tenant and a big advocate of Troy for a very long time. It's been a very good staple in the city of Troy. And we worked with them to create this site plan where we took the retail, and they wanted to protect their sight lines of their building and move the buildings off the corner, which we agreed to. It actually works better with traffic flow and so forth. And we created 2 retail buildings that complement this building. So the materials you see being used are all very complementary to the Kelly Services headquarter building, which is 10 stories, all glass building, and a staple in our minds. And we also took it a step further that we ran our steel a little taller, and we're hiding all the air condensing units on the roof. So even from the look of Kelly Services looking down, you don't see this. This is a 4-sided retail building with all Class A materials. So all brick, limestone, glazing. Everything is state of the art here. Moving back, we're demoing 911. We are proposing the demolition of 52,000 square foot office building that has been sitting vacant for quite a while here. With doing that, we're creating the parking, and it allows us to do a lot of phasing on the site. Our phasing would be our retail first, well, taking down the building, getting a parking lot in, and building the retail, and so forth. Unfortunately, just where the state of the economy is with COVID and the recovery of COVID and office space coming back, there's not a lot of traffic on the site at all. It is actually very sad to see that the office building is not being used. As you may or may not know, Kelly Services has downsized their operation from, I think, 4 buildings down to 1, and it's their main headquarter buildings where they're staying. They have implemented a work from home, which has gone very well for them. So the office building does not get the peak uses as it would, and I believe you would see that all along Troy, and should be taken into account when we do bring up the traffic issues or so forth. Going back, we are planning that the office building is going to be there for a very long time, and we're proposing to construct roughly a 550 car deck, which is a significant size parking deck, especially for this site. And we like to complement the property with clubhouse spaces and amenity spaces that not just the residents would be able to use, but also the office if it came back up and going. So it would be a joint site where we like to have the live, work, play asset of this property. I know Troy and a lot of other communities are pushing walkability. I truly believe that if you even park further away, it makes people walk, it makes people use different amenities. I think that's a big part of redevelopment with small corners or even big cities on how they place buildings. I don't mind people walking. I actually want that through the site. I want them to be able to park a little further and be able to use the retail, to use the amenities, and use while they're living there. We are looking at a 5-story apartment building right behind that, and it's pretty straightforward in that one, but I'm happy to discuss that. The further south, we were looking at the 2690 Crooks property, which we couldn't combine into one with our ownership and legal issues that we have, but we are combining this and utilizing the site as if it was one. We have a shared parking and a shared access agreements in place that would access both sites. In doing so, we are eliminating a curb cut along Crooks, and we are enhancing the the traffic signals both on Crooks and on Big Beaver. And we purchased this building from Kelly Services at the same time, and the state of the office on where it is right now, we still have not had many showings on this building, and we decided a little while ago to make the conversion into multifamily. In doing so, parking does change from office to multifamily, and we're able to fit another building on the parking lot there. My family company that I work with, we do a lot of these developments around the state. We consider ourselves to know a little bit about development and parking and so forth. We are very comfortable with the parking situation that's here on site. We actually think it's overparked. And one thing that we always consider, and it's what's right here. You have to look at the unit counts and what they are, and these are a lot of one-bedroom units that are going on site here, and the ordinance calls for 2 parks per unit. We have multifamily sites all around the state. They, even at 1.5 parks, we still have a parking surplus, and they are in identical areas and identical city-type feels. And furthermore, we want to utilize the walkability of the site and Big Beaver. COVID has changed us a lot, and I'm happy to have the traffic consultants talk more about traffic here, but it has changed us a lot on how what people have, how many cars they have, how they function, how they work. We do look at having shared rides, shared so forth. It's a different way of living. A lot of people are just using shared rides and actually having cars, let alone 2 cars today. But all in all, this is the whole development. We can dive more into architectural, traffic, engineering, and so forth. There was a lot of thought and planning that went into the site plan, and we have worked pretty close with Brent and Ben here with the city. And I'm happy to dive into any more detailed questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Ms. Mulally.
Thank you for coming and explaining. Couple questions. First one is, what's the total number of residential units as has been proposed, if approved? Lindsay Center, one behind the Lindsay Center, and the apartment building that is right there on the screen. What is the total number of units we are talking about?
I should know this off the top of my head. It's 62, 94, 150, 301.
Approximately 301.
Yes.
Okay. My second question is the access to the parking deck. How many accesses are you providing for the parking deck? Will there be just one access, or there will be?
There's one access, yes.
There is one access, and that access is proposed to be
on the north side of the parking structure furthest west, so close to the ingress egress where it's a right in and right out. And that's from a traffic access, that's the best point where you can funnel cars in and out pretty quick. And there is parking underneath the 5-story building also. So the first floor has some parking there.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Parakis.
I was going to actually ask you if you could comment on the drive-through. You didn't mention the drive-through building.
Yes. It's difficult for us to go and market to certain financial institutions. We understand the ordinance that it has to be a financial institution, not a fast casual restaurant or so forth. And before we have approvals, it's hard for us to go get commitment and say, hey, we have this approved for you and so forth. If we weren't not able to secure a financial institution, we would come back and work with Brent, say that this use is not out there. We want to turn it to straight retail and possibly even eliminate the drive-through. And if we were able to secure a financial institution, we'd be back in front of you guys with here's how big they're going to be, here's the car stacks of what we need and so forth. Right now it's preliminary, but it is necessary for us to actually go and market the space to potential customer and say, hey, here's what we're able to do, and go from there.
Okay, so thanks for answering that. I mean, as an overall project, I like the buildings, I like the designs. We definitely need an improvement on that corner. I was trying to get a little bit more of an understanding of what you're going for. Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with Crooks and Long Lake, that northwest corner. It's a bunch of vacant property. They're going to develop that. Unfortunately, this is a complicated property. It's got different elevate. The one we're talking about now, it's yours has got existing buildings. It's a lot of pavement, different elevations in terms of connecting the sites. So it is a challenge, but when you look at the north side of Big Beaver and Crooks, that east corner with Yard House and Seasons 52 and all that, they've really, I think the city of Troy loves that area, and they love coming and parking and staying and walking around. And so I was hoping that it would sort of complement that so people could then cross the street and walk. And we've been saying we want people to live down here, and you're bringing us 300 and some units, which is great. So all of that is positive and I think good. I do have a few concerns. I mean, I hear you on the, nobody wants to be overparked, so I hear you on that. And I'm willing to accept that you've done this in other locations, and your experience tells you we're overparked, but we have to make sure that, this is Troy. People generally have, I'm not saying a one-bedroom has 2 cars, but people have cars. There's very few people who are going to live in Troy without a car, and I just don't know if it's going to be acceptable to people to be walking from this site down here, which isn't even on the slide, all the way up to that yellow building to park their car. My concern is for the people who don't have the parking on site.
Yes, there is a phasing plan too. So our idea, if we were to need overflow parking, the sliver of parking to the east would complement the Lindsay Center, and we would push more cars into the parking deck for the main 5-story building. Now, I think that is a big if, but of course that's just my opinion. It's not necessarily walking all the way up, but I would want them to park as far so when they are parking, they can go into the retail and use the retail and then walk back to their unit. I get that it's a little bit of a walk, but that's what walkability is and how you create a downtown walkable, viable city, so forth. I know this isn't a urban downtown, say Birmingham, but we can push walkability as much as possible here, and that's the whole point. And the sliver of land in there on the east side would more or less complement Lindsay Center, and we would push more cars in the deck or underneath the building, of course, for the larger 5-story building. So there is a parking plan there, and where it's not necessarily parking all the way in the front of the building, the front on the corner, and walking all the way down Crooks Road, even though I would love for them to do that. It shows walkability, it shows people, and
Okay,
kind of
so I'm all about walkability. I love the idea, but then why are you asking for the variance to put first floor living along Crooks as opposed to putting retail so people will walk up Crooks and have that? And also, the site itself, to me, doesn't look very pedestrian friendly. Essentially, these people are walking through parking lots. I don't see the paths or the green space. You are deficient on open space and green space, so I'd like to see some paths and green space incorporated into the whole area so people feel comfortable walking from their residence to all the way up to Big Beaver and across the street and to take advantage of all these things.
I can tell you we work very closely with the walking paths, the cross paths and walking paths with Brent and Ben. There are a ton of paths that may not be highlighted on here, but the access points are there. As far, we can highlight them. You could kind of see them. We could kind of point them out if you want me to point with a thing.
Pointer right there, I think.
This site is connected. We are adding sidewalks here through the buildings. There is a crosshatch here. It all is crosshatched out. This is one of the points that OHM has reviewed and wanted, so all the dark spots are safety paths and so forth. It does connect all over. There is a sidewalk along here. It may not show it articulately because it's not in color, but this site is very well connected in our minds. And as far as the landscaping, we have over an acre and a, excuse me, I'm going to make sure I'm saying this right. 100,000 square feet. That's over 2 acres of green space on the site. It is a large site, and I understand that we're short. When we have 100,000 square feet of green space, it's, in my mind, should be a scale. As far as you go up, there should be some give and take. It's not always easy for this type of development to hit every single threshold on every part of it. It's kind of fitting a box in there, and know that there's over 2 acres of green space on the site. It is very green in our minds. It may be short a little bit, but taking that and you're just going to take away a little bit more parking and create more green space. Where they are placed on the site are strategic spots. We may have a longer row of parking, but on the end of the parking rows is usually where we put an island because of the turning ratios, and so cars do not get clipped and so forth. I don't want to stress it and say this much time, but there is over 2 acres of green space on the site. In our minds, it's a very green site. It is a much more green space than it is today on what we are adding. So it is not that we are improving the situation, and we have tried very hard to make sure that this is first class, and that's what we develop, and that's what we are going for here. So,
Mr. Faison, then Mr. Tagle.
So I was just curious about the kind of the interplay between the two sites. I know you said there's different ownership. Is it the same clientele that you're envisioning for both sites, same price points for the apartments?
it is going to be market driven.
Understood.
Yes.
I'm not asking what the price point is. I'm saying, are you looking
It's
for the same
that's a very difficult question being a developer today, and where pricing comes back at when we go to actually develop these. We go for market pricing, and we make a big investment up front, and the rents would tell us where it's at. Yes, we are looking for the same clientele, and it's practically anyone. We like a mix of all different types. I can tell you the younger renters and the older renters do not utilize the school districts. The family settings usually do. We like a combination of both. We divide up a pie and try to hit all aspects of demographics and so ages. And so it limits turnover in buildings too. But
Understood. Thanks. And then one follow-up question. I think it ties into it. So then the residents in the southern, in Lindsay Center, they could use the amenities in the
Yes.
northern, that'd be the expectation?
Yes.
Like you said, them walking through the site, maybe all the way to the retail.
yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Tagle.
Maybe you could help me better understand. You have three major buildings that are contributing to your parking needs. And those are the three residential buildings, correct?
Also the 10-story Kelly Service Office Building, but yes.
Yeah, I understand that. But how, 300 units?
Yes.
Yeah. I find it, I guess maybe I need to understand, of those three buildings, you've placed your parking deck as far away from those buildings as you can. I mean, the parking deck isn't centrally located to kind of serve those areas, or at least maybe instead of going east-west, it'd be good going north-south. So you could pick up some Kelly parking there, but also the residential parking. Because, I found it, and again, this goes back to my earlier comments to the staff, that I found it very difficult to look through your plans and understand the relationship between the two sites, because every sheet is separate. So you're not really combining the two sites together to see how they'll work together. But it's clear that this site, the blue parking deck, is the furthest from the three residential buildings, other than this this U-shaped building here. And I find that curious. I understand the walkability aspect, which I also agree with Ms. Barakas. I mean, yes, there's a sidewalk, but it's next to a building and a parking lot. I mean, there's a 7-foot sidewalk or whatever it is. It's not very inviting. And so I guess I'm not just sure I understand the rationale behind this plan.
There was a lot of thought that went into how these buildings are placed.
I'm sure there was.
And it's very difficult for a parking structure, especially for the office building, to walk through an apartment building. And
I'm sorry, could you
it's
say
very difficult to have a parking structure to walk through the apartment complex to get to their office. So if we switch the...
Well, wait a minute, they don't have a parking structure now, right?
No,
Kelly.
once we put a apartment building, we would need, meet the parking ordinance, we're
Well,
going to
we
have to build.
understand, too, that City of Troy has overparked for many, many years, so you've got an abundance of parking on that property that you don't need. So
Yes.
I get what you're saying, but you're missing my point.
I know, so even positioning the office, the parking, positioning the parking structure in a different area, different angle, or if you wanted to go north-south, we were trying to utilize Crooks as best as possible. We don't want a parking structure next to Crooks.
I'm not suggesting you
And-
go next to Crooks.
Yes, but we also are going to have,
It sounds like the Kelly employees are more considered for the parking structure and their parking needs than your residents on the Lindsay Center project or property.
it goes both. It does go both. And if the parking structure utilized for the Kelly Services headquarter building and also for the apartment building. Now, if you were just looking at this site, only this site right now, I would say it's positioned perfect. And know that we do have the side parking here that is very close to Lindsay that can subsidize it if needed. A unit with 2 cars, one car can park further, one car can park close to the building. The parking structure itself has to be taken into account for Kelly. They are a major tenant here. They are a major influencer. They've been here for a long time, and we have to take care of their needs, of course. And this has gone.
That's what I'm suggesting. I see alternative layouts that might serve both a little bit better than the way it's shown now.
We have explored it. It doesn't work the best. We have angled different areas, ran it north-south and so forth to try to capture it. This, in our minds, works the best, especially putting an apartment building along Troy with transparency and so forth, the issues that, of course, we'll probably discuss more. It just doesn't work very well. And know that this site has over 1,000 parking spaces. It's a lot of parking.
I'm not debating the number of parking spaces. What I'm talking about is the location of the generation of the need for the parking spaces and where they're at. That's what I'm talking about, that a majority of the people that are on that site, the residents, are quite a distance from the parking structure. And walkability is great, but come in here in January and February when it's 0 degrees and I've got to walk all the way to the parking structure to get to my car, that's not going to be real inviting.
Yes, but please understand, we do have parking on site. It's not just parking in the parking structure. There is parking on sites too. This is, I would say, overflow, but we'll let the traffic consultants tell us more about that. And it would be for the building that's probably 20, 40, 60 feet away. It's not necessarily for the residents, which they could, if they wanted to, from Lindsay Park there also.
Well, we had a similar issue come up on a previous application of last year. And one of the commissioners asked for, show us your parking plan. Show us where this building, where these people in this building are going to park. And maybe that's what we should see here. When you consider the 300 residents, and I don't know how many spaces you're allocating to the Kelly building, but where is your vision of where these people are going to park?
Yeah. In my personal opinion, how it will work out.
Your personal opinion. Where are you planning for these people to park?
Lindsay Center on Lindsay Center, and if it needs to be subsidized, the furthest row on the east side, and underneath the building for the 5-story building, the parking structure.
Okay. And knowing you're 91, according to the numbers, you're 91 cars short. So again, you're saying you've got plenty of parking? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But for you to sit there and say, in my opinion, they're going to park here or they're going to park there, I guess I need to see something more tangible.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jonah, I know one of your colleagues
Yes,
or
Kevin.
consultants wanted to...
Yes, Kevin Biddison with Biddison Architecture would like to discuss more.
Hi, Kevin Biddison. Just a couple of things, and I was wondering if maybe you could go a little bit farther. There's a series of renderings that are farther in the package that show the residential buildings kind of as a component. Part of the issue, again, is trying to create those 3 buildings. Keep going. There's a whole bunch of renderings that are more on the Lindsay site. Would be in that package. The idea is that...
Did Mr. Carlisle present it? Was it shown on the...
I haven't seen it yet. It was part of the Lindsay package.
Okay. Bear with me.
No problem. So the residential buildings are really compiled more together so that they can share facilities. The pool that's in the center courtyard of the 5-story that's on the Kelly site, and then the 2 buildings that are on the Lindsay site. So the idea was to create those areas more as that residential complex. There's a drive that goes through those, and they can walk back and forth. To put that parking structure in the middle of that, in my opinion, really changes the dynamic of the residential area. We put that basically next to the 10-story office building where it's going to have high use as well, but also to keep it within that as a more commercial area and not as the residential area. So I think if you look at this area on the bottom, you kind of see the connection of the 3 buildings that are the residential so that they can operate together, use the swimming pool. There are community buildings in all 3 buildings, community areas. And we want them to kind of commingle throughout this site. The parking structure is obviously on the north side, but again, we didn't feel that it was appropriate to stick that in the middle of the residential sites. We want to keep those more of a walking community together. And yes, they will go to the residential, to the retail space, but again, to me, that's not that far for them to do that, where if you walk in a city area at all. So that was really the reason we kept those buildings together and didn't drop that larger parking structure.
I appreciate that, and this looks great, but the issue I'm having is the distance from, if you were to tell me we've got enough parking in that residential core or around that residential core to substantiate those 3 buildings, I'd be fine with that. I'm not necessarily suggesting that parking deck go in the middle, as you said.
I think we really do, and I think that's what Mr. Jonah is trying to say, is that really, in all of their other developments, their 1.5 cars is more than enough to facilitate any of the other developments that they have. And therefore, yes, we're 91 spaces under for the 2 cars per unit for the Kelly, but not for the reality of how this is going to be used. The second building, the 5-story, has more than 50% of the building are 1-story or one-bedroom units. So we're very comfortable that the overlap of that parking is not going to be, nearly what you're thinking of it is.
Okay, so the residents aren't going to need to go to the parking structures, basically what I'm understanding.
We're basically saying that, yes, that closer row of parking, double row of parking that's next to the Kelly residential building is the biggest portion of overflow if we need additional spaces from those 2 right.
Thank you.
And Julie also is a traffic consultant that can speak more in depth and articulate it much more better than I can.
Good evening, Julie Kroll, Fleece and Vandenbrink. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the parking study, and I'm hopeful it was in your packet. Yes, okay. So we did a shared parking analysis, and I know one of the questions was, why didn't we combine the sites? And the reason is because the Kelly Services site, the northern site, it meets ordinance. So it met all the parking by ordinance. And actually, it was overparked by 34 spaces. per ordinance on the north side. But the south side, the Lindsay Center, was underparked per ordinance. So they said, okay, well, we need to figure out how much parking, what's the right size parking? Do we need the ordinance parking? So we did a parking analysis per ITE, 85th percentile parking demand. I know we've talked about that. We talked about it last time I was here. Those were the calcs that OHM asked us to evaluate, so that's what we did. So based upon that, the projected parking demand for the south site was 229 spaces. They are providing 224 on the Lindsay Center site. So they're 5 spaces short per the required demand per ITE. So then we say, okay, well, they need 5 more spaces to meet the demand. We know the north site has 34 spaces overparked per ordinance. I didn't even run the ITE numbers there. So that's enough to cover the overlap. So that's really, and the peak demand for residential is usually at night and on weekends. So it's usually when people come home from work and everybody's parked. So, and at that point, they're going to just search around the parking lot trying to find a spot. And if they end up being the last one in at 2 in the morning, then they're going to go just north of here and find an available spot. But most likely, it's not going to have to be in the parking garage, but if it was, we're not talking about a large number of vehicles, and they can be accommodated on the site. So we did run the numbers, and we were comfortable with the numbers that we saw, that they were going to have adequate parking. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, Ms. Malala Holly.
I guess I need some clarification.
Okay.
So have I understood it correctly? The parking deck is considered now to be an overflow parking for the residential units, but an essential parking for the Kelly Services building? Is that how you're seeing this?
No, so like basically when I'm looking at it at parking, I'm looking at the whole thing. So I can't expect that every single person in the Lindsay Center site to the south is going to walk all the way up to the parking garage. That parking deck is primarily for the people on the Kelly site. And the Lindsay site is pretty much self-parked at 224 when they need 229. So they're very, very close. So it's just in those where they need that additional that they may have to migrate to the north there to find an additional parking space. But 99% of the time, they'll have a parking space in front of their building on the south side.
So the Lindsay Center site has 5 parking spaces that it is deficient in. The other site has no deficiencies. In fact, they have 34 extra spaces. The parking deck is going to serve the needs of Kelly Services and the residential building that's going to sit closer in the Kelly Services site. Correct so far?
So the parking deck is going to serve whoever wants to park in the parking deck.
True.
So they could be in the retail building or whoever feels they want covered parking.
Just so that what Mr. Tagle brought out is a concern that I too have. So to seek clarification. So in the eventuality that on the lower picture on the slide that you see, the apartment building that's closest to Crooks. Let's say the gentleman or the lady in that apartment don't find a spot, and now they have to park in the parking deck. Can you approximate the distance that they will be walking back from the parking deck in case they have to park it there?
It's about 700 feet.
Mr. Faison.
Thank you.
So when you talked about the Lindsay site's parking requirements and the Kelly site's parking requirements, I think you used 2 different terms.
I did, yes.
So for the Kelly site, you used the ordinance.
Yes.
For the Lindsay site,
yep.
you used something else.
We used the Institute of Transportation Engineers Parking Generation Manual.
So understood. So my question is, for the Lindsay site, what is the ordinance requirement, and how much are they short per the ordinance?
Hang on.
Mr. Carlo.
Yeah, so, based on
They are short, I'm sorry.
based on 156 units, they've required 312 spaces.
Yep.
And they've got 221 spaces on Lindsay Center, so they're 91, I think it's 91 spaces.
I had 224, but yes, per ordinance.
Per ordinance, by ordinance alone, they're 91 spaces deficient on the Lindsay Center site.
Thank you, that was my question.
Mr. Fox?
So if the goal for the parking deck is that anyone can park on it, has it also factored in people coming in to potentially shop at the different commercial that's on the site? Like people who don't live in the apartment, people who are just, there's a store they really like that's on the first floor of whatever, one of the apartment buildings? Has that also been factored in?
Yeah, that's per ordinance. So whatever's required per ordinance for parking on the site.
And I don't know if this is potentially a question for another one of the team. I'm curious the decision that led to the pursuing the waiver of first floor being commercial and why we're interested in having it be apartments. It seems like leaving that as per the zoning, having that be commercial alleviates some of the parking concerns. Quite honestly, I feel like it would pull more people into the more walkable area. It would be giving them places to shop and places to go to. I'm just curious why you were pursuing removing that commercial and replacing it with apartments.
Yeah, it's very difficult to mix buildings and so forth, ventilation and so forth, traffic with security, with people how they live. It's not necessarily an urban setting. We do have people that come and go a lot. We're concerned with retail down Crooks Road. We did commit to the clubhouse / usable building in front of the parking structure, so we hid the parking structure and we complemented it by pushing the other building back. So there still is transparency through those units, and it's about 6 units there. And going further down where the Lindsay Center actually sits in front of the building, we put all of the clubhouse amenities on the road there, so you do see a transparency. It's difficult to have a retail center on that part of Crooks, sandwiched between those. We don't think it's a good play and so forth, and we wouldn't make that investment in that building to do that there. The retail is on Big Beaver. That's where Big Beaver has always been and so forth. And I know we've looked at a couple other sites here in Troy and so forth. Maybe the better way to look at the parking all in general is, I believe there was a different site in Troy that was approved with multifamily, and they have some land bank parking. Basically, our parking structure, or even our north side, is basically our land bank, but it is there already to use. And that's how we would actually look at the site. If we didn't have enough parking, we couldn't lease a unit. In the grand scheme of things, it's very minute in our minds. Just our opinion, of course. We did hire a traffic consultant to look at different areas and how it is. There are different peak times and how it does flow with traffic. A lot of one-bedroom units do not have 2 cars. It's just how it is today. 1 car, and if they did have 2 cars, they're more than welcome to use the parking structure to leave it there and so forth and have an immediate car in front of their unit. But I have to apologize also. I should have brought Julie up to answer the question first. I don't think I articulated it in the best fashion. I made a little confused everyone on that part of it, but
No need to apologize. So.
When you got a minute. I just want to get a little clarification. So what Julie said, the ITE, I just want to get these numbers straight in my head. The ITE allows for 1.8 vehicles for the apartments. Is that what we're looking at? And that's why it requires 229 when we actually have 224? Is that what we're?
So the actual ITE rate is 1.47 spaces per dwelling unit. That's the peak. So that was weekday, 85th percentile.
So it's 1.47.
Yep, and then,
ITE.
yep, and then, yep,
Troy is 2.
yep.
Thanks.
Weekend was less. It was 1.33, so we used the 1.47 because it was more conservative.
Any more questions for the applicant? Yes, Mr. Fox.
Yeah. So I have one last question. It's not related to parking. So I'm curious, what are you guys' intentions in terms of powering the site? Like, is it going to be typical, like through DTE, et cetera?
Oh, yes.
Have you guys done exploratory into adding potentially solar, et cetera, to reduce the environmental impact of all of the different buildings, or? I'm just curious.
There's not, the load that here we would need DTE, any solar that would be added would be very not much power that we could drive to actually do these buildings. No, we are planning on using DTE and main transformers that are already existing on site and reutilizing the existing structure, which makes most sense on this development.
I wanted to make sure it was explored, so.
Yes.
Any other questions? Mr. Tagle?
Contrary to all of my comments about the parking and the walkability, I think this is a very nice project.
Thank you.
I think the architecture on here is very nice, will be very handsome, and looking forward to it. But I think there are some things that still need to be worked out as all projects. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Parakis.
I mean, we haven't talked yet about the circulation inside with the streets. There was a slide up that talked about different streets with different names, like Middle Site Drive, West Side Drive, Kelly Drive, the South Side Drive. And just to give us an idea of connectivity to Tower Drive, I saw when I was driving over there that they put like a sort of a ramp so you could drive back into the property behind this building. And then you're telling us that you're going to connect the two, the north from the south, so I imagine that's going to be a ramp drive down as well. And so now all of a sudden we're having traffic coming in off Crooks Road onto drives, which I imagine are roads, cutting through, and none of the pictures really depict that.
So that's an existing easement that has been there for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's been recorded a long time ago. We cannot eliminate that. It's part of the easement that's been recorded with the property. So they've always had access to Crooks. And what we did is we eliminated one of the accesses on Lindsay. Right now there's 2 access points on Lindsay Center. And it's basically a big U that you go around the building. We eliminated the north drive. I could kind of show it right here. There is a existing curb cut right here, and then this one flows out to here. We thought it was pointless to have 2 drives right next to each other, so we're realigning. We've worked with the county road commission to enhance this light here, line it up with Butterfield, and bring access point through here, I believe it is. There is a big grade difference here, so this is the most obstacle place that we could actually join the sites. So they've always had access to Crooks. It's just we're rerouting them to an actual light and formalizing and making traffic work a lot better.
I mean, but your renderings never really show these traffic areas. I mean, we see the people walking around in the pool and the green, but really there's roads going through. I'd like to see, in the future, I'd like to see more detail on how it's actually going to look, also with the addition of the building. All of the renderings, the 3D renderings, none of them show all of the buildings. It seems like the one opposite Lindsay, to the east of Lindsay, is always missing. So it doesn't give a complete picture for me to see how it's all going to.
There is a couple views. Ben, would you be able to go back to the aerial views? We just had one up that showed 3 buildings, and I'm just curious if there's another angle in there on it.
That one?
No, it was with the architectural on how we had 3 buildings placed to create the community.
The renderings that had up before?
Yeah, how we placed the 3 buildings to create a community with all the residential there.
There?
Is there another view in there? There is quite a few renderings, and I don't know if they all made it through the deck, but. So the access would just be right behind this building here and coming through here.
So that's
If I can go into the 911, 999, I think.
Yes, so this would be a view of that.
Go further in?
If you just go back up one.
You'll see a road right through there.
Yep.
That one?
One more back. So this would be the road here.
There's one more that looks down that road, so you can see where that's.
Okay.
You go there. One more.
This would be the road that we're talking here.
And then I think we
We don't think it's going to be a major thorough access point, but it is there, and it's been existing. It doesn't get a lot of traffic right now. You just see a few cars, even through the winter with the plowing and so forth. You don't even see tracks through the snow on it, but it is an existing curb cut that we have to keep. And this has been reviewed with the traffic engineers and also Oakland County Road Commission that has signed off on preliminary review of the traffic through the site and entering ingress and egress with the site.
Any more questions? Yes, Mr. Fox.
One last question, and this is from the report. I remember something was mentioned on the southern site regarding trash screening, how you're going to be utilizing existing trash screening. Is the presumption that you guys are going to be, like you expect an increase in the amount of trash hauled from the southern site? Because it's going from apartment to residential. I assume that means more trash will be being produced by the two buildings. So is the existing screening just large enough that more trash can go into it, or may I ask on that?
Yes, there is a certain trash enclosures there right now. When we do get abundance of trash, we look at adding trash compactors. We recently added a 8-yard compactor and so forth. So we do think about different ideas. We do want to eliminate as much trash from inside the building. We also implement trash valet systems that they can actually pick trash up from their units and dispose of it right away without even taking it to the dumpsters and so forth. It depends on the renters and how they react, and we react accordingly on our management side of the property. Recently, we did implement a trash valet system in Livonia at 8 Mile and Haggerty, a new 200-unit complex that we developed, and it works out pretty well.
May I also recommend, as a former renter here in Troy who was living in the Somerset Park Apartments, offering recycling hauling as well, as
Yes.
opposed to just trash hauling?
Yes, that is part of the plan.
Oh, perfect. That is good to hear. Thank you.
All right. We did a public hearing at our last meeting, but we will still take comments from the public. Mr. Savanen.
We held a public hearing for 2690, but we did not hold a public hearing for 911 and 999.
So we can do that. Well, then, is there anyone from the public? Well, here, I'll open the public hearing for this item for the units, the northern property. Anyone would like to speak to the commission on the northern property, or both properties? So, seeing no one approaching, we'll close the public hearing then for that item. And I did have actually a couple of questions, Mr. Jonah, and then I want to get the spokesperson from OHM up here to answer questions.
Yes, of course.
One is for the Lindsay Center, there was a question Mr. Carla asked us, is the building there supposed to have exterior lighting or some kind of lighting on that building?
The existing building?
Or either building, any lighting on the outside of it?
If there, does it have lighting? What's that? The balconies are over.
Just balcony
Sorry.
lighting?
Balcony does that. There will be some lighting, and it's always shielded with downlights, so it doesn't go out into so forth, and there's luminance that we take. It's a lighting complex, but it wouldn't be overly bright for a residential complex. Typically, it's above the balconies that we have them, but I believe these are overhangs, so there may be some sort of lighting in the new facade that we're adding on top of the building. But as far as wall sconces and lights, I don't believe there are.
Yeah, we're keeping those levels very low.
Okay, good. The other question is, and I know the question's come up a couple of times about how far you're asking people to walk from the residential units to the parking garage. Have you given some thought to maybe some way of allowing people that live in those south 2 units to access through the middle of the northern multifamily unit so they don't have to walk outside to get to that parking garage along the sidewalks? Like,
Oh, that's very doable, yes.
they'll be able to access it,
Yes.
so at least,
Yes, they will have access
so in
with
the
their amenities.
wintertime, they won't have to walk away
No.
around the outside.
And I believe the distance that was quoted was from end to end. It was the furthest points, and it was, if it does happen, it's a handful of people, and if we had to subsidize them for doing that, of course, we're going to take care of our customers, so forth. So
Okay. Great. Once you have a seat, then we'll bring up the person from OHM. Oh, did you have a question, Mr. Krent? Mr. Jonah, come on back.
One quick question on the apartments to the east of the Lindsay Center building, the new apartments, the rectangular one. Are there parking on the first floor of those? I saw a lot of lines there.
There are some parking on the first floor, and we put them in the back of the property, so they wouldn't be seen.
Thanks.
And
Go ahead.
Okay. The person from OHM here, yeah, come on up. And I'm sure in addition to parking questions, you might want to touch on the traffic issues as well that was in your memo that you sent to us, so.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Stefan Max from OHM, and we have reviewed the site. Do you want me to speak about it, or do you have any questions?
Why don't you generally speak about it, and then we can answer or ask questions.
Okay. So for both sites together, we didn't have any major concerns with the traffic impact study. There were some minor comments we offered about specific numbers in the tables and such. With regards to the shared parking, I think our concern has kind of been talked about a lot, is that with the two different sites and the currently same ownership, if they were developed at different rates, we just want to ensure that there is enough parking at any of those phases. If the northern site's not developed at all, the southern site would have enough shared parking with the existing parking lot. But while the parking structures are under construction, if 2690 is at a different stage of construction, we want to ensure that there is enough parking at that point. And another main point we had was the connection between the sites. Currently it has stairs there, and if during construction that's going to be improved, they showed that, but if that's not built when the southern site's under construction, then and they're needing those parking spaces for access, we want to make sure that there's an accessible route between those sites, and the current existing crosswalk that they show goes straight and then skews through the parking lot, and we'd like to be able to straighten that up for visually impaired or handicapped pedestrians to be able to have a straight crossing to the sidewalk instead of having to navigate a painted line at an angle. So those were the main things we saw with our concerns with the existing sites or proposed sites.
Thank you. Any questions for the OHM representative? Yes.
Can you please ask the gentleman from OHM to sign in?
Yes.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Sorry about that. Any questions? Mr. Faison.
Just one question. I don't know if you'd be able to answer it, but I'm just curious if OHM or you have a view of our ordinance requirement of 2 spaces per unit. In this case, these 1-bedroom units versus some of the comments of like 1.5 spaces per unit being more appropriate in the current environment.
Well, the City of Troy's requirement of 2 spaces, I mean, it's the ITE studies are throughout the country. Every place is a little bit different, and that is an average rate. The City of Troy's requirement of 2 spaces is higher than that, but it's good to be conservative in a way, and but I don't have a specific experience on with this site, this type of site.
But I'm assuming the ITE analysis has credibility.
Yes, it has. Yeah, there's many studies for it. It's throughout the country. They have to be submitted with a certain level of quality to meet that, to be in that handbook.
Understood. I
Yeah.
knew you couldn't opine
Yeah.
so,
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Parakis.
Well, along those lines, though, for the IT, is it taking an average of parking, or is it comparing similar cities, or are we being compared to New York City? And it's averaged in there.
So in the handbook, it lists the types of developments that are looked at, and they do consider types of sizes of communities, size of developments. There's a minimum size that they looked at and a maximum size, and a range of the sizes that they use to create those numbers.
Okay. I do have a question about the traffic. There was There was a note about the level of service F for northbound traffic south of Big Beaver.
Yes.
On Crooks. So as a planning commission, I think that we have to decide, you know, what's acceptable for us, because we live in this community, and for me, you know, level of service F, I mean, it says, there's language that says unacceptable. So we're talking about introducing that in our community, and I'm not sure why we're recommending that and saying, yeah, that's fine, it's just during peak hours, so we're not really worried about it. Can you explain why you would make a recommendation for that when we're creating that type of traffic?
Well, it's definitely not ideal to have a level service F. The nature of the Big Beaver corridor it's pretty unique. And with the amount of traffic that there was prior to pandemic and then changing throughout 2020, 2021, now 2022, 23, like other places have come back to almost back to normal levels, but Big Beaver is still a little bit down from what it was before. Maybe the nature of the large office buildings that are here and a lot of the changes to working from home. So I guess the thing is that if a development is making it significantly worse or from the existing, it's kind of, yeah, for this, sorry. Yeah, this is the northbound on Crooks, or was it on the, okay, northbound Crooks, right turn. I'm sorry, I don't have.
It was the stop control, right?
Okay, that's what I thought, yeah.
Yes,
So-
yeah, 73 seconds.
Okay, so this is the driveway onto Big Beaver from the site that was level service F73. So that is going to only affect the users of the site. That's not affecting the traffic on the roadway, public roadway.
So you're saying it's affecting Big Beaver and not Crooks?
It's affecting the driveway onto Crooks, or sorry, onto Big Beaver from the 991, I believe.
Any more questions? Yes, Mr. Fox.
Did OHM's analysis also look at existing public transportation in the area and potential expansion of public transportation? Like, I don't know, I'm like picturing potentially a bus stop that would service the apartments. I don't know if that's something that OHM would have looked at, or if that was something that another part would have looked at.
We did not look at that. We looked at the study that was prepared by them.
Any more questions? Yes, Mr. Tagle.
Yeah, one of the comments was about improved pedestrian circulation based on OHM comments. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So I know that one of the comments was the one I mentioned earlier about the crossing between the sites. And we also had recommended sidewalks on the north or on the east and west sides of Building B of 2690, which is the new building, because, and then I think those were the pedestrian circulation comments we had on that. The big one is the connection between the sites. If they're going to be using that to access the shared parking, we want to make sure that's an accessible route.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bring it back to the commission. Well, let's, I guess we should now go to, in order, since they're separate items, we should probably go with item number 6, which is the special use approval and preliminary site plan review for the proposed 2690 Crooks Road Apartments. Any questions from members of the commission, or does somebody want to float a resolution?
I guess.
Yes, Mr. Fox.
Point of clarification. So this discussion has kind of become like we're talking about both items in one. The vote is still separate.
Correct.
And so is this a situation where if we are going to vote down one of the two items, we should vote down both? Or is this, you kind of get what I'm asking?
Yes.
Like if we pass one and not the other, is there really a point to doing that?
I believe, and I don't want to put words into the mouths of our experts, but they stand separately. So potentially you could approve one and turn the other one down, or approve one and postpone one, or?
Well, in theory, 2690 Crooks could be approved, and with adequate shared parking on the vacant asphalt parking lot to the north, and then they decide to walk away from 911, 999, and 2690 stands on its own with plenty of parking available to the north, theoretically. So that could stand alone. So potentially, if 2690 were to be approved, a condition of approval could be that adequate parking in the future in the event that 911, 999 Big Beaver is approved, something to that effect.
Thank you, Mr. Savinet. Did that answer your question relatively good? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions or suggest that Ms. Parakis?
Well, I'm just wondering what my fellow commissioners think about the parking situation, and do we think it's overparked, underparked? Are we comfortable with it? What are people's thoughts?
Mr. Fox.
Well, so a year ago, I was living in the Somerset Park Apartments over not too far, actually, from this development. And admittedly, it was rough when we had to park pretty far away from our building, I will say. And I mean, that is with me and my wife, who both happen to be able-bodied. We don't have any physical restrictions that would make it difficult for us to move. So even though I understand that the applicant's taken a lot of efforts to ensure that there's not a lot of parking for the apartments that are overflowing into that structure, I think just looking at the site and understanding what we've talked about today, it's kind of inevitable that you're going to get people who live in those apartment buildings to the south parking in that parking deck. So I mean, it makes me nervous, I guess maybe is the best way to put it. You know, there'd have to be a lot of considerations to make sure that the walkway is actually easily accessible, is well maintained, et cetera. But it does kind of leave me with a question mark.
Yes, Mr. Faison.
I guess I'm kind of concerned about it, on the fence about it, but when I think about it, I think it's the applicant that has the most at risk if the parking is insufficient, right? And the plan doesn't work, the site doesn't work, and so on. I think they may be in a better position to make an assessment of the park, within reason, right? Within reason, so mixed, but leaning toward favorable for that reason.
Mr. Beekner?
I was curious what one of my mentors, Mr. Hudson, would say about all this.
He's got his hand raised, so he'll probably answer you right now.
I beg your pardon?
I was calling you one of my mentors, so I was curious what you were thinking right about now.
My thinking is that we're following the wrong procedure. There should be a resolution before this body, seconded if it's going that far, then we have a discussion on it, and that's where this discussion is appropriate. So that's what your mentor thinks.
Okay. Somebody want to float a resolution? Yes, Mr. Krent.
Resolved, the Planning Commission hereby approves a reduction in the total number of required parking spaces for the proposed 2690 Crooks Road residential development to 221 when the total of 312 spaces are required on the site based on the off-street parking space requirements for multifamily residential. This 91 space reduction is sufficient to meet the parking demands based on the shared parking provided on the abutting site to the north, and resolve that special use approval and preliminary site plan approval for the proposed 2690 Crooks Road apartments east side of Crooks, south of Big Beaver, 2690 Crooks, Section 28, currently Zone BB, Big Beaver District, be granted subject to the following conditions. Number one, increase drive aisle width to at least 26 feet. Improve pedestrian circulation based on OHM's comments. Confirm existing screening of trash enclosure. Confirm building lighting. Verify unit numbers. Provide a shared parking agreement to the satisfaction of the city attorney prior to final site plan approval, and provide transparency calculations. Any other add-ons, guys?
Anything else you want in there, especially Mr. Savinant?
Well, so we process the applications that we receive. And Mr. Carlisle went really briefly into the history, how at one time these were combined, they were separated, and now they're kind of back together again. So this was written, like I indicated a few minutes ago, as kind of a standalone with shared parking to the north, and it doesn't really take into effect the potential for build-out to the north because we want to talk about it this evening and et cetera, et cetera. So treating this like a standalone, we should maybe put in a condition related to the provision of that required parking in the event that 911 and 999 is constructed.
Is that okay with you, Mr.
That's okay with
Krantz?
me. I won't have to repeat that, will I?
Yeah, I don't know if I was really going for the perfect verbiage there. I was just kind of explaining
All right.
that we should add something.
All right. Then, yeah, number 8 on that list.
So, Mr. Ben's, Bertie in my ear whispered that.
Mentor.
Yeah, my mentor, my better half. Item 6 may cover that with providing a shared parking agreement to the satisfaction of the city attorney. So that would also wrap that into the agreement.
So we don't need to add anything then. Thank you, Mr. Carlisle.
Good, thanks, Ben.
All right, anything else we need to add in the resolution? All right, then I'll accept a second to the resolution. Mr. Faison seconds it. Any discussion on the motion? Now we're doing things the way Mr. Hudson wants us to do it here.
I think that's the proper way of doing it.
Thank you, sir. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Tagle.
You know, we haven't addressed the landscaping. Right now, the trees are ringing the parking lot. And there have been a number of projects that have come before us where we've liked to see in the parking lot the asphalt broken up a little bit. Well, that has a contingent impact on the number of parking spaces. So all of a sudden, from 91, we're going to be 91 plus if we say pull some of those trees off of the perimeter. My personal opinion, I don't think the trees should just be around the perimeter. I think that parking lot should be softened a little bit, broken up a little bit with some interior parking lot landscaping. The other part about the pedestrian access and walkability, as I said earlier, these are just basically sidewalks along a parking space and along the edge of a building. Again, it's not a very friendly walk. It's kind of a harsh get from point A to point B. And I personally would like to see something developed that would be a little bit, I don't know, maybe take a parking space and put some benches there or, where the landscaping is or something just to kind of take away that rawness of the travel.
Mr. Krantz, you want to maybe include something in your resolution?
Well, modify the landscaping to include more trees within the parking lot. You want to see specific numbers?
Well, see, that's the thing. I don't know what the specific number is. I mean, I'm not the designer of the site. I don't know. Do we have a percentage?
The standard, I believe, is 1 per 8, and the intent is at every 8 spaces you have an island to break up that long mass. If you look at the landscape plan, the site plan, there's pretty long rows. I mean, it looks like there's rows of 40-plus spaces without a breakage there. They're required 28 spaces, 28 trees, and they've got 3 interior, and like I said, 25 on the perimeter. So, the ordinance requires 1 every 8 with a breakage at those 8 spaces. That's what the ordinance requires.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, to be fair, I'd throw it back on the developer and say, come back and show us what you are proposing, because I don't want to sit here and say, put 25 or 28 or whatever the number is, because I want to see this development succeed, and I don't want this to be the straw that broke the camel's back. But on the other hand, I think there's some areas to improve it.
Sure.
So are you suggesting maybe postponing action on this so that the developer can come back with some
solid
modifications?
That would be my suggestion.
All right.
Excuse me, if I could just make a quick comment on that. I have no problem looking at islands and so forth, and necessarily doesn't have to take away parking. We do have some width here that we can widen the parking spaces, put them in between. Personally, I would not like to see it this size of development being held up with the trees. I'm confident we could work with planning department in order to fulfill some more tree requirements. And please know that we did work very hard to keep almost a whole park right on site here. It is a very green site too. We kept that for a reason. We wanted to have a very green space rather than just broken up. In our minds, we do feel like we want to contain some of the parking to where it is and have free access. The sidewalks are 5 and 7 feet wide. They are very substantial sidewalks. It's not just a 3-foot sidewalk. These are very wide sidewalks that are being proposed here. I feel confident that we can work with Brent and Ben, which we have in the past, to add a couple trees and so forth and break up islands without losing parking, per se. There are particular ways of doing this, and I personally would not like to see a whole development of this size being held up for another month for this issue. That I believe we could work with planning. You have a very good staff here that's very knowledgeable, that's pushed us and talked in depth about a lot of these details in the past, and I have faith that we can both do the right by this, but just my only request on that.
Thank you.
Well, then I would say after they finish just their little conversation.
Okay, as soon as they're done, they can.
We weren't talking, I was looking over his shoulder.
How can we accommodate getting 1 tree per 8 spaces into a resolution and still not seriously impact the parking? That's a puzzle, huh?
I can't answer that right now.
Right.
So just off the bat, and this is something that we would work with planning on, I would believe you're looking at the space that where 9/11 the building currently sits. We would actually widen the parking structure and put islands in between, elongated and not just islands, and break it up that way. There are certain ways, and we'll work with architects and planning and come up with some sort of creative way to add some trees in here.
I'll put it back to the commission then. Do you feel that Ben Carlisle and Brent Savadon can work with this developer to accommodate the tree requirements?
You know, Mr. Tago is raising his hand, so he might have an answer.
Well, I'm just one person on this commission, but as you pointed out, this is a huge project, and we'd like to make sure we understand the things that you want to accomplish in this project. And so I have full confidence in Mr. Carlisle and Mr. Savadon to be able to work things like this out. But this is the body that's going to move this forward for you. So I think, in my opinion, this body has to be assured that what you're going to be presenting is acceptable to us. Because adding the trees, I'm not so sure that you're not going to be more deficient in parking. You say you've got plenty of excess space out there to add the trees and not add to your deficiency in parking, but I don't know that. I don't know that you know that.
I would suggest that if we were any more deficiency that would come back, if we were able to satisfy the tree recommendation with planning, that it could move, but that's just something that I could propose. Yep. No, I understand. If we lose more parking spaces, then we would come back. In all, you're over 1,000 parking spaces here for the whole site. I know that they are in different areas, and there's been contentions on this, but it is a lot of parking in our minds. It's going to be a sea of parking that would sit vacant for a while. So I believe we could work this out where we have the ability and knowledge with our staff and your staff that they could figure out how to widen the parking lot and get elongated islands in instead of losing parking spaces. It's been done in the past. We've worked with Carlisle Wortman for quite a while, and we've learned a lot from them, and they would have a very good insight on how to do something like this.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ms. Malala Holly. Then I'll get Mr. Hudson.
Do you want to go ahead?
Well, I think Mr. Teigel's got an excellent point. We work through our resolutions. This is a huge project. I don't want to see it delayed either. But trees in the parking, I think, are important. And if we've got to take another 10, 15 minutes tonight to resolve that, we should. Otherwise, I'd be constrained to vote no, even though I think it's a great project, because I think those trees and parking are important.
Thank you. I guess the question is whether we could resolve it in 10 or 15 minutes or not, so. Yes, Mr. Faison.
Ms. Malala.
Oh, Ms. Malala, then Mr. Faison.
So one of the reasons that I am finding it difficult to say yes or vote yes to this is I want to see how much room or how much space the residents will have walking to and fro, even between buildings. And I think if the applicant is able to provide us a rendition of the space he's talking about, that there's enough space in terms of sidewalks and walkability. I don't think some of the pictures did justice to what he's trying to refer to, so if we could have some additional pictures that also includes some more green space accommodation, I think we will have a better idea as to how the residents will feel once they are there and how the walkability is achieved and also how the green space requirement is met, and also to have a understanding of the project before it gets its final approval. I would like to see renditions of those from the surface level, aerial view, however it is going to be achieved. But what are we talking about in terms of walkability space? Because we keep hearing that it's wide enough, it's wide enough. How wide is it? How many trees can you incorporate in that space? Not sacrificing any more parking spaces. That's what I would like to see.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Faison.
So I think I heard the applicant say or proposed working with staff to meet the ordinance and have the requisite trees in the parking lot, and also meet the parking requirement with shared parking. Is that correct?
I believe so.
So then again, I would be supportive, and I don't know that I need to see that. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing that, but I don't know if I need to see that if we've got assurance that it's going to meet the requirements. And if it doesn't, then it comes back to us, I presume.
Mr. Savidant first, then Mr. Tagle. Did you have something to say or
No.
Okay.
I'm just listening.
All right, Mr. Tagle.
I guess I would ask, what requirements are we expecting them to meet?
Well, I thought it was one tree for every 8 spaces.
Interior.
In the interior,
the parking lot.
correct. Yes, that's the
And
requirement.
that will not reduce or increase the number of deficient cars.
I think that's what the applicant said.
That's what we have to
And
put
so,
in.
again,
And the only
those two things are
other
affirmative.
component for me was the sidewalks, was the 200-foot long, 7-foot wide sidewalk, or whatever it is, whatever the dimension is. You know, to me, it's just not user-friendly. But, you know, again, I'm one voice.
Yes, Ms. Paracas.
So I tend to agree with Mr. Tagle and Ms. Malala in terms of this is a huge project, and I think that there's room for improvement. I think that the points that Mr. Tagle brought up and Ms. Malala and the issue of connectivity, and if we're going to create this as, you know, we're looking at this as one site where people are living and using this and using that, but we're not really showing I need a better understanding of the circulation and how people are walking. And the concern I have about sending you off to put the trees in without increasing the deficiencies is then you're gonna have to take it from somewhere. So all of a sudden now our green space, which is already deficient, is going to decrease. And then I also am not gonna give up on this parking situation. The zoning ordinance does tell us that off-street parking for uses in all districts shall be on the same lot, okay, unless joint parking is allowed. Then they talk specifically in section 13.06B3 for single-family detached units or duplexes, it basically needs to be located on the premises. They don't talk about multifamily, which is what we're talking about, but on number 9 it says, for those uses not specifically mentioned, which would be multifamily, the requirements for off-street parking facilities shall be in accord with the use which the Planning Commission considers is similar in type. For me, similar in type would be other residential. I don't entirely agree with the comment that I hear a lot on the Planning Commission that it's really the applicant's problem, because you drive around town all the time and we say, they won't build it if they can't lease it or if they can't sell it, but they do. And we have empty properties. There's still an office space that's brand new, never been used, and it's 6 years old. And that hurts everybody. That hurts the people in this community who drive by empty spaces all the time. So for me, that's not acceptable. The fact that you had trouble parking and that was troublesome, I don't want to be the person who voted for something and people saying, oh my gosh, I live in this apartment and I have to walk 700 feet to get to my car in the middle of the winter. And you know, we say, oh, well, one car can be there. No, if both people who live in the apartment show up late at night, they're both don't have a parking spot that's near. So for me, that's problematic. I'm not comfortable with the parking situation as is. I mean, there's another provision that says that parking spaces, if they're not on the, we're using shared parking, it's got to be provided on an adjacent lot within 300 feet of the building it's intended to serve, measured from the nearest public building entrance to the nearest parking space of the off-street parking lot. That takes that structure off the table for meeting our requirements. So we're either making the decision that they're allowed to be deficient, or I want to see the picture that we normally get where we can sit and count the parking spots and feel comfortable. I don't know if there's some sort of middle ground with the 2 that Troy requires and the 1.5 that other group requires, what we're comfortable with. I mean, I'm not saying that I have to have 91 spots, but being 91 deficient, I'm not comfortable with at this point, because I don't even think I think it violates our zoning ordinances.
Mr. Frayne, I'm going to throw a parliamentary question your way. Is a motion to postpone take precedence over the motion that's on the floor?
We have to vote on the motion itself.
Okay, all right. I think we've all discussed the original motion, and so if you want to postpone, then you would vote no on this resolution and then go on to postponement, so.
You can pull, I mean, you could pull, Mr. Craig could pull the motion.
Instead of voting no, you could, the motion maker and the secretary can pull the motion, so that you're not actually voting no on the plan, you're pulling the motion, and then you're going to do another motion of a different course.
So does somebody want to make a motion to pull the motion off the floor?
The maker.
I have to do that.
Okay.
All right, I'll pull my motion, my resolution in motion.
We still have to vote on that, though, don't we, or don't we?
No.
Okay,
I pulled
all
it,
right.
it's gone.
Mr. Faison, are you willing to withdraw your second?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And since Mr. Tagle was the one who was initially concerned about, for proper reasons, the placement of the trees, would you like to make a motion to postpone action?
Let me ask.
Oh, Mr. Seven.
I just want to clarify, this is for 2690.
Yes, 2690, yep.
2690.
Let me ask for a clarification. How detailed does this motion have to be? Does it just have to add the compliance with the interior parking lot landscaping and enhancement of the pedestrian ways? Or do I have to read through all of the items that were in the previous motion?
Well, you're the motion maker, not me, but I'm not trying to be, so it could be as simple as addressing the issues identified in the report without having to go through the whole resolution. And I think the key here, it sounds like we're moving towards postponement, that you want to provide them with clear direction so that they have a path to success.
Well, I'm not quite sure if I have to read through the resolve or.
No,
just-
you don't.
Okay,
For
all
a
right.
postponement, no.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to postpone this application so that the applicant may comply with the ordinance requirements of interior parking lot landscaping, enhance the pedestrian ways, walkways, and to provide information to this commission with regard to the distance to the parking spots for the residential units in excess of what's currently around the building.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded, and this is for 2690. So Staff okay with that resolution? I mean, meeting requirements, okay. Any discussion? Seeing none, we're ready for roll call.
Mr. Lambert,
Yes.
Ms. Malala-Holly,
Yes?
Ms. Parakis,
Yes.
Mr. Tagle,
Yes.
Mr. Biekner,
Yes.
Mr. Faison,
Yes.
Mr. Fox,
Yes.
Mr. Hudson,
Yes.
Mr. Krantz.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, the motion to postpone passes. And then now we're on to the proposed 911 and 999 West Big Beaver mixed-use development resolution. What's the will of the body here?
Is it the same thing?
No.
It's different, the property to the north.
No, is
so
it the same?
It could be, if you wanted to make a motion to postpone, kind of citing similar reasons to, you might want to throw some other information in there. Mr. Fox.
I would like to make a motion to postpone per reasons discussed in the previous motion, including those listed in the proposed resolution as well, numbers 1 through 9.
And do we want to include something in there about the access to the parking garage, where it's located? Yes, Mr. Savadan.
I can just add my observations listening to the conversation. Ms. Parakis had, I think she has concerns, and I tend to agree, that if the parking can be broken down and explained in a really simplistic way that everyone can understand, including diagrams and, just very, not 150 pages, but really simplistically, easily understandable. And I also heard the Planning Commission is looking for something like a circulation plan that clearly shows the pedestrian amenities, the sidewalks, if there's benches proposed, et cetera, that clearly describes how all this pieces together. Just a few pieces of information that would help really tie these two sites together and make it clear for the Planning Commission.
Is that okay to include in your resolution?
Yes,
Before I get a second, Ms. Parakis, do you want to add something in there? Or?
Well, are we going to discuss after this?
Yes.
Okay, I'll wait.
Okay. All right. Mr. Biekner seconds it. Okay. Discussion.
Yeah, along with what Mr. Savadan said, I'd like to see a better understanding of the easements to Tower Center Drive and to the other, to the neighboring properties. I just want to get an understanding of the flow and the connectivity. And then I also want to know what other planning commissioners think of the idea of the drive-through bank, because they're asking specifically for us to provide them that special use. And I guess my thinking and comment is, I don't feel like it really fits the environment. We're trying to make it, we keep talking about walkability and bringing people in and trying to have green space and people spending some time and the people walking there. And so putting a drive-through financial institution to me doesn't fit. I'd like to see something a little bit more interesting that, a different idea, something more interesting there.
And
Mr. Hudson, then Ms. Maha.
Yeah, maybe I'm thinking outside the box on this one, but if we've got a problem with the location of the parking structure pursuant to the ordinance, could a conditional rezoning resolve a lot of this? Why not?
So the underlying zoning district permits parking decks by right as long as they meet the standards. What zoning district were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking, Ms. Parakis is talking about that it's got to be within 300 feet or so of a residential property or something of that nature. And the placement certainly is longer than 300 feet. And it looks like there really wasn't any clear direction in that zoning regarding a deviation. A conditional rezoning is going to throw everything off the railroad tracks for a long time. But if you're looking for a way to get around that without moving the parking structure, maybe that's a way of doing it.
Yeah, I would say I think it's an interesting idea, but the provisions apply across. They're in the parking requirements. They apply across the board, and this is really a placement issue and not a zoning issue, in my opinion. It's more a design issue, not a zoning issue.
You're the zoning administrator.
One of the hats I wear.
Any further discussion? Mr. Fox, then Mr. Buechner, then Ms. Malala. I'm sorry, I should have called on you. You are first then, because you were supposed to be
That's
right
fine.
after Mr.
Thank you.
Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. No, so if I remember in the conversation or in the explanation that the applicant gave, he is not committed to that building being a financial institution. So it could very well be something else too. Am I correct in my understanding? It could be another restaurant which needs a drive-through access. Am I correct in my understanding? Or is it just going to be?
So in the Big Beaver District, drive-throughs are only permitted for financial institutions.
I
And so you approve a special use based on specific use. So if you approve the special use, it would only be for a financial institution with a drive-through.
Okay.
If they came back with another use, such as a restaurant, that would be permitted, but they couldn't have a drive-through associated with that. So the drive-through would go away.
I see. Okay, so potentially what will sit there could be something else other than a financial institution. So
It could be another building with another use that's permitted in the zoning ordinance. But if it's something different that requires a special use, it would have to come back to the Planning Commission for future approvals.
Thank you for the clarification.
Now, Mr. Fox and Mr. Buechner.
Yeah, just to comment a bit on the financial institution. Admittedly, I don't know if that's as much of a make or break for me personally. I think the fact that it's off of Big Beaver, and considering that I'm picturing more of the walkability being south of that, kind of closer down, kind of south down Crooks towards the apartment complexes, I think having a drive-through financial institution is probably fine there, would be my take on it, but I'm just one of 9, so.
Mr. Buechner?
Ms. Parakis, I'm a big fan, and I know that area, and I work right there. There's a lot of drive-throughs there, and I go to them. And I think it's kind of common in that area. There's a ton of banks right in that area, so I think, is there room for another one? Maybe, but that's a big corridor for banks and drive-throughs, because I go there all the time. And one other detail I would mention, and we've hit it, but I'd love to see a slide of the big picture showing whatever color, sidewalk, 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 sidewalk. That's going to show a lot for us. I think that's going to show a lot for your customers.
Any further discussion on the motion to postpone? So I think, yes, Mr. Tagle.
Was the resolution, did it include the 9 points that was published in our resolution?
Yes, I did include them.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, Mr. Faison.
Just a question, is there an issue with the placement of the parking garage if it's going to be used for shared parking? If it's 700 feet from a building versus 300 feet, does that have to be addressed as well?
I think that was what Mr. Savanant repeated, what Ms. Parakis said, that he needs to take another look at that. Isn't that correct?
I think the pedestrian circulation plan and the vehicular circulation plan will go a long way to kind of justifying its placement and showing if it works or not.
Okay.
If I could just comment real quick. Yes, thank you. If I could just comment real quick on the parking structure. We do have a partner here on site, which is a very large user of space, and this has been agreed upon, and we have looked and explored it. It's not possible to move it for them. It is almost set in stone with this big organization, and it's very difficult to change for the fact it's already been agreed upon way before, so forth. It was kind of dictated in advance with this. So want to throw that out there. And I do hear everyone's concerns. We would do our best to accommodate. If we're not able to, we understand, and this site plan will change dramatically, and we will bring our best forward within the next planning commission. But if we cannot accommodate everything, please understand that we would have to make some dramatic changes to this, and it would change to alter what our vision is to the site, and we'll take it from there. It is what it is. So.
If the motion passes, we'll look forward to your presentation when you come back again. So any further discussion? Yes.
I just want to say it again, because I don't know if I didn't articulate well and you missed my point. But the point about the bank was that I don't feel like it really adds to the environment that they're telling us that they're trying to make, where it's this live and play area with walkability. So if you put a restaurant, then the people are going to walk over there or other types of retail that would bring people. A drive-through bank sort of puts a brake on people walking because all of a sudden now you have the, like, that's why I wanted to see the circulation, because now we have people coming in off Big Beaver and circling around on a bank drive-through, and they're not allowed to do it unless it's a special use that they're asking us for. So, you know, I'd like to see another option that I think makes more sense for that area. And it offers something to the rest of the community as well. Not that a bank doesn't, but as you said, we already have a lot of drive-through banks on that corridor.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we're ready for the motion.
Ms. Malala-Holly?
Yes.
Ms. Parakis?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Biegner?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Motion carries.
We will see you back again, so.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, next on the agenda is election of officers, and we have to elect, I guess, a chair and a vice chair, and then also, do we have to do our ZBA liaison tonight too, Mr. Savinant?
I'm sorry?
Do we have to also do our ZBA liaison?
Yeah, it's a recommendation for council.
All right, so is there a motion? Yes, Ms. Parakis.
I'd like to nominate you, Mr. Lambert, to continue as serving as our chair.
Does that need a second?
that.
Oh, it's been seconded. Any other nominees? Come on.
That was easy.
You're stuck.
Okay. I did talk to, before the meeting, talked to Ms. Parakis, said, you know, I think you're ready to move on to be chair, but she didn't want to, so everyone should all have their opportunity to be chair just to see what it's like to be here, but appreciate the nomination, and no further nominations, so you looked up the rules and said we have to say that, I guess you have to, instead of saying yes, you have to say my name or something like that, so I guess we'll call the roll call.
Just to clarify, because we talked about this before, Ms. Parakis, can you confirm, is that only if there's multiple candidates, or is that in every situation?
If there's more than one nominee.
Oh,
okay.
So if there's only one nominee, I think we can just say yes.
Okay, all right. Seeing no one else was willing to step forward, I guess we'll vote on the motion to elect myself as chair again, so Ms. Zarnecki?
Was there support by Commissioner Krant?
I believe Mr. Krent did, yes.
Ms. Parakis?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Biegner?
Lambert.
I think that's yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Malala-Holly?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate that. Now for election of vice chair, I guess I'll return the favor and nominate Ms. Parakis for vice chair.
I'll second that. He
So
gets a second.
we'll let Mr. Biegner second at this time. Any other nominations for vice chair? No one else wants to serve, so we will go for a roll call on re-electing Ms. Parakis as vice chair.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Biegner?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Malala-Holly?
Yes.
Ms. Parakis?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And now we have to elect, or recommendation to City Council for a ZBA liaison. Ms. Malala-Holly's been doing it great for the past year, but she indicated to me she did not want to serve another year as the liaison. So would somebody like to either make a nomination or step forward to be the liaison? For our newer members, it's a great way to learn how the other side works. So if Mr. Biegner or Mr. Fox would be interested. The only bad thing about it is you can meet one more Tuesday night a month, so.
My wife did threaten me if I took this position,
Okay.
so.
All right. Mr. Biegner, would you be interested?
I'm going to pass, but thank you.
All right. Somebody else want to step forward as the liaison? Well, Mr. Faison, nope.
I've got commitments
All right.
on Tuesday, so I know I wouldn't be able to make every meeting.
Nobody's stepping forward? Nobody wants to make a nomination?
For lack of someone stepping forward, I will, I'll throw my name in for that.
Well,
Yeah.
Hey, you got it.
All right. So just don't tell your wife what you're doing that third.
The specific stipulation she gave me was if it genuinely seems like no one else wants to do it, you can do it, so.
Okay. I would nominate Mr. Fox to be or recommend to City Council that Mr. Fox be the liaison to the ZBA. Is there a second?
I'll wholeheartedly second that one.
Mr. Krent seconds it. Any other nominees? Seeing none, I guess we're ready for the roll call.
Mr. Biegler?
Fox.
Ms. Malala-Holly?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson? Mr. Hudson?
Wake up. Oh.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Ms. Parakis?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes. Congratulations. All right, now we are on to public comment for items on the agenda. Does anyone here wish to speak to the commission on an item on the agenda? Seeing none, we are ready for planning commission comment. So we'll start with Mrs. Arnecki and work our way across.
Well, I can share with you that I've been on the Fraser Planning Board for a number of years, but again, last Wednesday evening, they got me to do chair.
All right, congratulations. Mr. Fox?
Don't be surprised if my wife comes to the next public comment. Just, that's all I got.
Happy New Year, guys.
No comments.
No comments.
Nothing for me.
Happy New Year. Glad to be back.
Nothing?
I'm good. Ms. Dufresne?
So I have bad news to report with respect to one of the lawsuits that I'm handling, the Tollbrook matters, the McClure and Alpine. Judge Mattis finally issued an opinion on my motions to dismiss, and he granted with respect to the substantive due process issue, but he denied with respect to the takings claim. So we will be proceeding on that claim.
Okay. Thanks for the update, I think. So, Mr. Savidant?
Welcome to our newest member, Mr. Fox, and congratulations. 10% of your nights are going to be spent in this room.
Mr. Carlisle?
Welcome, Mr. Fox.
Yes.
Julie, could we ask you, we could barely make out what you said regarding Judge Mattis. Could you repeat that for us?
Sure. On the Tollbrook matters, which are McClure and Alpine, he granted, as I had filed a motion motion to dismiss on both cases, he granted with respect to the substantive due process, but he denied with respect to takings. So the takings claims will proceed.
Takings.
What does that mean in English?
It means that they have, Tollbrook and Tollbrook West have established, according to the court anyways, a prima facie case of takings.
And what is it taking?
Well,
Denied them their
right.
Their property
The decisions
rights.
made by city council have resulted in a taking of Mr. Soppett's properties.
Oh, okay.
So we just bought a subdivision.
All right. And the only thing I wanted to add was, I know I've watched some of the city council meetings. I don't know if Mr. Fox was at some of them, but I know they've been discussing sustainability. Mr. Savidant, is that something that Planning Commission will potentially be involved in, sustainability studies?
There hasn't been, we haven't been given direction yet. I haven't been given direction yet. We do a lot of things in zoning that we don't really talk about enough regarding sustainability. For example, the relief we provide for parking is a best management practice that reduces the amount of asphalt in the city. We do sustainable development projects. We have 20% open space. We have the cluster developments. We do a lot of things that kind of go unheralded, but I haven't been given any direction yet.
All right, thank you. With that, we are adjourned.
Okay.